Hey there, folks. Welcome to our cozy nook of tales and adventures. Today, like every episode, we're unlocking the doors of imagination to explore new worlds, meet fascinating characters, and experience unique emotions. I promise to take you on an unforgettable journey through the power of words. So get comfy, grab your favorite drink, snuggle into that perfect spot, and get ready to lose yourself in a new story. Leave the outside world behind for a while and dive with me into the depths of storytelling. If you enjoy our content and want to support the channel, consider hitting the subscribe button and giving the video a thumbs up. Now, without further ado, let's dive into today's story. The Whispering Woods of Willowbottom. In the gentle rolling hills of the Shire, where the summer breeze carried the scent of wildflowers and fresh-baked bread, there lived a hobbit named Milo Burrows. Unlike many of his kin who were content with the simple pleasures of gardening and multiple daily meals, Milo possessed a quiet curiosity about the world beyond his comfortable hobbit hole. This was not to say he was adventurous like the infamous Bilbo Baggins. Goodness no. Milo preferred his adventures to be of the scholarly sort, conducted from the safety of his armchair with a good book and a steaming cup of tea. Milo's home was nestled in a less-travelled corner of the Shire, known as Willowbottom, where ancient willow trees swayed over tranquil brooks, their trailing branches creating dappled patterns of sunlight on the mossy ground. It was on a particularly mild autumn evening, as golden leaves drifted lazily from the trees, that Milo found himself walking along the edge of the Whispering Woods. The setting sun cast long shadows across his path, and the first stars of evening were beginning to appear in the deepening blue sky. He had spent the day in his garden, harvesting the last of his prize-winning tomatoes, and contemplating what seeds to plant come spring. As Milo walked, humming a tune his grandmother had taught him long ago, he noticed something unusual, gleaming among the roots of an ancient willow. Bending down, he discovered a small silver object half buried in the soft earth. With gentle fingers, he extracted it and wiped away the soil. In his palm lay a delicate silver acorn, so perfectly crafted it might have been plucked from a tree in some enchanted realm. "Well now, what might you be?" Milo whispered, turning the acorn over in his hand. Its surface caught the fading sunlight and seemed to glow with an inner light of its own. There was something about it that spoke of magic and distant realms, places that proper hobbits had no business concerning themselves with. A sensible hobbit would have left such a curious object where it lay, or perhaps handed it over to the village elders for safekeeping. But as the silver acorn rested in Milo's palm, he felt an inexplicable connection to it, as though it had been waiting specifically for him to find it. With a quick glance around to ensure no neighbours were watching, for hobbits do love to gossip, Milo slipped the silver acorn into his waistcoat pocket and continued his evening stroll, though his thoughts now dwelled on his mysterious discovery rather than tomorrow's breakfast menu. That night, as Milo sat by his fireplace examining the silver acorn more closely, he noticed delicate inscriptions etched into its surface. The markings were unlike any language he had seen in his modest collection of books. They flowed like water, or perhaps like music given physical form, shifting subtly in the firelight. As he traced one of the markings with his fingertip, the acorn grew warm in his hand, and Milo was certain he heard a faint whisper, though he could not make out any words. "Curious indeed," he murmured, setting the acorn on the small table beside his chair. He reached for his pipe, packed it with Longbottom leaf, and puffed thoughtfully as he watched the silver acorn gleam in the firelight. Perhaps tomorrow he would visit old Boffin, who was said to have travelled as far as Bree in his youth, and might know something of strange silver trinkets. That night, Milo dreamed of ancient willow trees whose branches swayed to an unheard melody. In his dream, the trees whispered secrets in a language he almost understood, and silver acorns fell like rain from their branches, each one containing a story or song or memory. He woke just before dawn, with the fragments of these whispers still echoing in his mind, though they faded quickly like morning mist under the rising sun. After a hearty breakfast of scrambled eggs, mushrooms, bacon, and freshly baked bread with honey, for a hobbit must maintain his strength, Milo wrapped the silver acorn carefully in a handkerchief and set off toward old Boffin's home at the far end of Willowbottom. The morning was crisp and clear, with dew sparkling on every blade of grass and spiderweb. Birds sang in the hedgerows, and the distant hills were veiled in a light mist that would soon burn away under the autumn sun. As Milo walked, he couldn't help but notice that the Whispering Woods seemed somehow closer today, as though the trees had shifted in the night, inching nearer to the path. He dismissed this fanciful notion with a shake of his head. Trees didn't move after all, and he had likely been too preoccupied with his own thoughts to pay proper attention to his surroundings yesterday. Yet as he passed by the ancient willow where he'd found the silver acorn, Milo could have sworn he heard his name being called, so softly, it might have been merely the rustling of leaves in the gentle morning breeze. He paused, listening intently, but heard nothing more than the ordinary sounds of the countryside. Birds, insects, the distant bleating of sheep, and the babbling of the brook that wound through Willow Bottom. With a slight shiver that had nothing to do with the morning chill, Milo continued on his way to Old Boffin's home, unaware that his discovery of the silver acorn had set in motion events that would soon disrupt the peaceful rhythm of life in his corner of the Shire. Old Boffin lived in a hobbit hole that was ancient even by Shire standards. Its round door faded from generations of sunlight, and its garden slightly wild, in a way that suggested its owner had more important matters to attend to than pruning rose bushes. As Milo approached, he saw smoke rising from the chimney in lazy spirals, a promising sign that the old hobbit was at home. After 3 polite knocks, the door creaked open to reveal Boffin himself, a hobbit of advanced years with a shock of white hair that seemed to grow in all directions and eyebrows so bushy they nearly obscured his keen blue eyes. He wore a patchwork robe that had clearly been mended many times over, and his feet, even hairier than most hobbits, peeked out from beneath its hem. "Well now, young Burrows," Boffin said, peering at Milo. "You're about the last hobbit I'd expect on my doorstep before second breakfast. What brings you here at this hour?" Milo shifted from one foot to the other, suddenly feeling foolish about his quest. "I found something unusual, Mr. Boffin, and thought you might have some knowledge about it, given your travels and such." Boffin's bushy eyebrows rose even higher. "Found something, did you? Well, come in, come in. No sense in letting all the warmth escape while we stand here chattering." The inside of Boffin's home was as cluttered as his garden, with books and maps stacked on every available surface, curious artifacts hanging from the ceiling beams, and shelves crowded with jars containing substances Milo couldn't begin to identify. The air smelled of pipeweed, old parchment, and something vaguely spicy that Milo couldn't place. "Sit yourself down," Boffin said, gesturing toward a worn armchair by the fire. "I've just put the kettle on. Nothing like a cup of tea to accompany a good mystery, eh?" As Boffin busied himself with the tea things, Milo carefully unwrapped the silver acorn and held it in his palm, noticing that it seemed warmer than before and the inscriptions more defined, as though proximity to Boffin's home had somehow awakened it further. When Boffin turned with 2 steaming mugs, his eyes immediately locked onto the silver object in Milo's hand. The old hobbit nearly dropped the tea in his surprise. "By all the stars," he whispered, setting the mugs down with a hasty clatter. "Where did you find that, lad?" Milo explained about his walk by the Whispering Woods, and how the acorn had caught his eye among the roots of an ancient willow tree. As he spoke, Boffin's expression shifted from surprise to wonder to something that looked remarkably like fear. "May I?" Boffin asked, extending his gnarled hand. Milo hesitated, feeling an unexpected reluctance to part with the acorn, but then chided himself for such foolishness and handed it over. Boffin turned the silver acorn over in his hands, muttering to himself as he traced the inscriptions with a trembling finger. "It's been years, decades even. Never thought I'd see another." "Another?" Milo prompted, leaning forward. "You've seen something like this before?" Boffin looked up, his eyes distant as though gazing into the past. "Once, long ago, when I travelled beyond Bree to the borders of the old forest, there was an elf there, taller than any creature I'd ever seen, with hair like sunlight and eyes that held the wisdom of centuries. He carried a staff crowned with a silver acorn identical to this one." "An elf?" Milo's eyes widened. Elves were the stuff of fireside tales in the Shire, rarely seen and even more rarely spoken to. "Indeed," Boffin nodded solemnly. "He told me that the silver acorns are keys of a sort. They open pathways between our world and the ancient realms, where the oldest magic still dwells. The inscriptions are in a language older than the elves themselves, a tongue spoken by the very trees of the primeval forests." Milo felt a shiver run down his spine. And what happens if one were to use such a key? Boffin's gaze sharpened. That would depend on the bearer's intentions and the will of the forest. Some who enter the pathways find wisdom, and return with stories to last a lifetime. Others, he paused, his voice dropping to a whisper, others are never seen again. A heavy silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant ticking of a clock from somewhere in the cluttered room. The Whispering Woods, Boffin said eventually, are said to be one of the few places in the Shire where the veil between worlds grows thin during certain times of the year. The autumn equinox approaches, 3 days hence. If you were inclined toward adventure, which I'm not suggesting you should be, mind you, that would be the time when this key would be most potent. Milo's mind whirled with possibilities. What should I do with it? Should I return it to where I found it? Boffin carefully handed the acorn back to Milo. That, my young friend, is for you to decide. The acorn found you, not the other way around. In my experience, such things happen for a reason, though the reason may not be clear until much later. As Milo departed from Boffin's home, the silver acorn safely tucked back into his waistcoat pocket, he felt both enlightened and burdened by this new knowledge. The familiar paths of Willowbottom suddenly seemed different, as though overlaid with the possibility of unseen worlds just beyond his perception. And the Whispering Woods, visible from the path leading back to his home, appeared to shimmer slightly in the mid-morning light, the ancient willows swaying as though beckoning to him with their long, graceful branches. For the remainder of that day, Milo could think of little else besides the silver acorn and Boffin's words. He went about his usual routine of tending his garden, preparing meals, and sorting through his collection of pressed leaves, but his mind constantly returned to the mysterious object and the possibilities it represented. That evening, as he sat in his garden, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, Milo held the silver acorn in his palm, feeling its gentle warmth against his skin. The inscriptions seemed to shift and change as the light faded, glowing with a soft luminescence of their own. A key to other realms, he murmured, turning it over thoughtfully. What sort of hobbit would I be if I used such a thing? Not a proper one, certainly. Proper hobbits didn't concern themselves with magical artifacts or hidden pathways to elven realms. They focused on gardening and genealogy, on brewing ale and baking seed cakes, on celebrating birthdays, and preserving the comfortable rhythms of Shire life. Yet something within my lower, small, insistent voice that he had spent most of his life politely ignoring whispered that perhaps there was more to being a hobbit than propriety and comfort. Perhaps there was room for a bit of wonder too. As twilight deepened into night, Milo made his decision. He would wait for the autumn equinox, as Boffin had suggested, and see what the silver acorn might reveal. In the meantime, he would learn what he could about the Whispering Woods and prepare himself for whatever might come. After all, even the most improper adventure required proper preparation. That much, at least, was still quite hobbit-like. The next morning, Milo woke early and packed a small basket with bread, cheese, apples, and a flask of blackberry cordial. He intended to spend the day exploring the edges of the Whispering Woods, gathering information without venturing too deeply into its mysterious depths. As he approached the woods, Milo noticed something peculiar. The weather in Willowbottom was sunny and mild, with just a few wispy clouds drifting across the blue sky. But the Whispering Woods seemed to exist in a different season altogether. A light mist clung to the ancient trees, and the leaves still green, not touched by autumn's pallets, weighed in a breeze that didn't reach beyond the forest's edge. Milo settled himself on a flat stone at the forest boundary, unwrapped a wedge of cheese, and observed the woods while he ate. The silver acorn in his pocket felt warmer the closer he came to the trees, and occasionally he thought he could hear faint voices carried on the unfelt breeze whispers in a language he couldn't understand, but somehow recognized from his dreams. "Excuse me," came a voice from behind him, causing Milo to nearly choke on a bite of apple. "Are you planning to go in there?" Turning, Milo found himself looking up at a young hobbit lass with curly auburn hair and freckles scattered across her nose. She carried a basket of her own, filled with what appeared to be various herbs and mushrooms. Lily Proudfoot, she introduced herself with a slight curtsy. "My grandmother sends me into the woods for herbs sometimes, but never alone, and never this close to the equinox." Milo hurriedly stood and bowed. "Milo Burrows, at your service." "And no, I wasn't planning to enter, just observing." Lily gave him a skeptical look. Nobody observes the Whispering Woods this intently, unless they're planning something foolish. She settled beside him on the stone, uninvited but not unwelcome. Grandmother says the woods remember a time before hobbits, before men, even before elves. She says they have secrets they only share with those they deem worthy. And how does one become worthy in the eyes of trees? Milo asked. Curiosity piqued. Lily shrugged. Grandmother never said, but she did tell me that during the equinox, when day and night stand in perfect balance, the woods sometimes open paths to elsewhere. She gave Milo a sidelong glance. That's why we never gather herbs on the equinox. Things that go in don't always come out, or if they do, they come out changed. The silver acorn seemed to pulse against Milo's thigh, as though responding to Lily's words. He resisted the urge to touch it, suddenly concerned that it might somehow reveal itself. Your grandmother sounds like a wise hobbit, Milo said carefully. I'd be interested to hear more of her knowledge about the woods. Lily's expression brightened. Would you? She loves sharing her stories, but most hobbits in Willowbottom think she's a bit odd for knowing such things. She hopped up from the stone. She lives just over that hill, the hobbit hole with the blue door and all the birdhouses. Tell her I sent you, and she'll talk your ear off about the woods and whatever else you'd like to know. With that, Lily hefted her basket and continued on her way, humming a cheerful tune that seemed at odds with the eerie atmosphere surrounding the whispering woods. Milo watched her go, considering this unexpected turn of events. A grandmother with knowledge of the woods could prove invaluable if he truly intended to use the silver acorn on the equinox. Perhaps this was fortune smiling upon his budding adventure. As he packed up his own basket and prepared to seek out Lily's grandmother, Milo couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He glanced back at the whispering woods, where the ancient willows swayed in their private breeze, their trailing branches like countless fingers beckoning him closer. The hobbit hole with the blue door was not difficult to find. It stood apart from the other dwellings of Willowbottom, situated on a gentle rise that offered a commanding view of both the village and the whispering woods beyond. As Lily had mentioned, numerous birdhouses of various shapes and colours adorned the garden, and the air was alive with the fluttering and chirping of sparrows, finches, and thrushes. Milo approached the round blue door and hesitated, suddenly unsure of himself. What would he say? Good day. I'm interested in magical forests and enchanted pathways. Such talk would mark him as eccentric at best and completely addled at worst. Yet the silver acorn in his pocket seemed to grow warmer, as though encouraging him forward. Before he could knock, the door swung open to reveal an elderly hobbit woman with a cloud of silver hair pulled back in a loose bun. Despite her advanced years, she stood straight and tall for a hobbit, and her eyes were sharp and bright, the same shade of hazel as her granddaughter's. Well now, she said, looking Milo up and down. You finally arrived. I've been expecting you since you found the silver key. Milo's mouth fell open in surprise. How did you... The birds tell me many things, she replied with a wave of her hand, as though this explained everything. Come in, I've just put the kettle on. Feeling as though he had somehow stumbled into one of Old Took's fantastical tales, Milo followed her into a cozy sitting room. Unlike Boffin's cluttered dwelling, this hobbit hole was immaculately kept, with shelves of dried herbs and flowers lining the walls, and curious mobiles hanging from the ceiling beams, crafted from feathers, small bells, and polished stones. I am Tansy Proudfoot, the elderly hobbit said, as she poured tea into delicate cups painted with images of birds. Lily's grandmother, as you've guessed, and keeper of certain knowledge that most in the Shire have forgotten or chosen to ignore. Milo Burrows, he replied, accepting the tea, though it seems you already knew that. Tansy's eyes twinkled with amusement. I know many who live in Willowbottom, Master Burrows, though we may not have been formally introduced. Now, show me what you found by the ancient willow. With only slight hesitation, Milo withdrew the silver acorn from his pocket and placed it on the small table between them. In the warm light of Tansy's home, the inscriptions seemed to ripple and dance, casting faint reflections on the ceiling above. Ah, Tansy breathed, her eyes wide with wonder. It has been many years since I've seen its like. May I? She extended her wrinkled hand. Milo nodded, and Tansy picked up the silver acorn with reverent care. She turned it over in her palm, tracing the inscriptions with a practiced finger. The language of the elder trees, she murmured. Few now remember it, even among the elves. She looked up at Milo. Do you know what you found, young hobbit? A key, Milo replied, remembering Boffin's words, to pathways between worlds. Tansy nodded slowly. Yes, and more than that. The silver acorns are memories of the first forest, from before the world was divided. They remember the time when all living things could speak to one another, trees, and beasts, and birds, and even the very stones of the earth. She handed the acorn back to Milo, who cradled it carefully in his palm. The Whispering Woods are one of the few places where the memory of that time remains strong. During the equinox, when day and night achieve perfect balance, the woods remember most clearly, and the boundaries between worlds grow thin. "What lies on the other side?" Milo asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Tansy's expression grew distant, as though she were looking at something far beyond the walls of her hobbit hole. "I cannot say with certainty, for each pathway is unique to the one who opens it. Some say the pathways lead to the realm of the elder trees, beings of such ancient wisdom that they remember the first dawn of the world. Others believe they lead to places within the walker's own heart visions of what might be, or what might have been." She fixed Milo with a penetrating gaze. "What matters is your intention in seeking such a path. Why do you wish to use the key, Master Burrows?" The question caught Milo off guard. He hadn't fully examined his own motivations beyond a vague sense of curiosity and wonder. I suppose I wish to understand," he said slowly. "All my life I've felt that there was more to the world than what we see in the Shire, more depth, more mystery. Not that I'm discontent with hobbit life," he hastened to add, "but I've always felt there were stories and songs just beyond my hearing. If only I knew how to listen." Tansy smiled, and the lines around her eyes crinkled with genuine warmth. "That is a worthy reason, Milo Burrows, better than most who seek out such pathways." She leaned forward. "If you truly wish to use the key on the night of the equinox, you must prepare yourself. The Whispering Woods may test you, for they do not yield their secrets easily, even to one who holds a silver key." Under Tansy's guidance, Milo began his preparations for the equinox. First, she instructed him to fashion a small pouch from green linen cloth, embroidered with patterns resembling the inscriptions on the silver acorn. "The key must be carried with respect," Tansy explained as she helped him sew the delicate patterns with thread dyed from forest herbs. The elder trees appreciate those who approach their realm with care and reverence. Next, she sent him to gather specific herbs from the edges of the Whispering Woods, never venturing too deeply to create what she called forest offerings. "Leave these at the base of the ancient willow where you found the key," she instructed. "It's a gesture of gratitude and intent. The woods will recognize it." As Milo collected sprigs of thyme, bundles of lavender, and rare woodland mushrooms that grew only in the shadow of the oldest trees, he became aware of subtle changes happening around him. Birds seemed to follow his progress through the meadows, watching with unusual interest. The wind carried whispers that sounded almost like his name, and at night, his dreams grew vivid with images of winding paths through endless trees and voices calling to him from just beyond his sight. On the day before the equinox, Milo sat in Tansy's kitchen, mixing the gathered herbs with beeswax and oils pressed from forest nuts, creating small balls of fragrant offerings as she had taught him. "Tomorrow night, as the sun sets and perfect balance is achieved between day and night, go to the ancient willow," Tansy said, watching his work with approving eyes. "Place your offerings at its roots, hold the key in your palm, and speak your intention clearly." "What words should I use?" Milo asked, carefully wrapping the herbal balls in leaves. "The words must be your own," Tansy replied. "But speak from your heart, with honesty and respect. The woods respond to truth, not to practiced phrases or empty flattery." Lily came by later that afternoon, carrying a bundle wrapped in soft cloth. Her expression was a mixture of curiosity and concern as she handed it to Milo. "Grandmother asked me to bring you this," she said, "though I wish you wouldn't go. The woods aren't like the friendly little copses near Hobbiton, you know. They remember things, old things, not all of them pleasant." Milo unwrapped the bundle to find a small lantern crafted from copper and glass, intricate leaf patterns cut into its sides. "It's beautiful," he breathed, holding it up to catch the light. "It's not for beauty," Lily corrected. "It's protection. The light from that lantern will show you the true path when illusions try to lead you astray. Grandmother says to fill it with oil infused with moonflowers that bloom only at night." Milo looked up at her, touched by her concern. "Would you like to come with me tomorrow?" he asked impulsively. 2 sets of hobbit eyes might be better than one. Lily's eyes widened. "Into the woods? On the equinox?" She shook her head firmly. "I've more sense than that, Milo Burrows. And if you had any, you'd stay home with a good book and a plate of seed cakes instead of chasing after elf magic. Yet, despite her protests, Milo noticed she didn't try to dissuade him further, and when she left, she pressed a small carved wooden charm into his hand, a little bird with outstretched wings. "For luck," she said simply, and hurried away before he could thank her properly. That night, Milo sat beside his window, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. The silver acorn lay on his palm, warmer than ever, its inscriptions glowing with a soft blue light that hadn't been visible before. As he gazed at it, Milo felt a strange sensation as though the boundaries of his small hobbit hole were expanding, stretching to encompass vast forests and ancient mountains, stars and streams, and the deep, slow heartbeat of the world itself. For a breathless moment, he understood what Tansy meant about the time when all living things could speak to one another. He felt connected to everything: the wood of his chair, grown from trees that had once reached toward the sun, the cotton of his shirt, which remembered fields of white blossoms, the very air he breathed, shared by all creatures since the first dawn of the world. Then the moment passed, and he was simply Milo Burrows again, a hobbit of moderate means and unremarkable history, sitting alone in his quiet home. But something had changed. He knew now, with certainty beyond doubt, that he would follow the path revealed by the silver key, wherever it might lead. Dawn broke on the day of the equinox with a perfect clarity, as though the world itself recognized the significance of the day. Milo moved through his morning routines with deliberate care, preparing himself for the night to come. He packed a small bag with provisions: bread, cheese, apples, a flask of water, and added the copper lantern, the herbal offerings, and Lily's wooden charm. Throughout the day, an anticipatory hush seemed to fall over Willowbottom. Birds sang less, insects hummed more quietly, and even the usually boisterous hobbit children played their games in subdued tones. It was as if all of nature held its breath, waiting for the moment when day and night would stand in perfect balance. As afternoon waned toward evening, Milo donned his warmest jacket, wrapped his green scarf around his neck, and slung his pack over his shoulder. The silver acorn, nestled in its embroidered pouch, hung from a cord around his neck, resting against his chest like a second heartbeat. The journey to the ancient willow did not take long, though to Milo it seemed both fleeting and eternal. The setting sun cast long shadows across Willowbottom, painting the landscape in hues of gold and amber. The air was perfectly still, without even the slightest breeze to stir the leaves or carry the usual evening sounds of the countryside. As Milo approached the edge of the Whispering Woods, he noticed that the trees seemed different, somehow taller perhaps, their shapes more defined against the darkening sky. The ancient willow where he had found the silver acorn stood a little apart from the others, its massive trunk gnarled with age, its sweeping branches creating a curtain of slender leaves that brushed the ground. Milo paused at the boundary of the woods, took a deep breath, and crossed over. Immediately he felt the difference. The air was cooler here, heavy with the scent of moss and rich earth and growing things. The sounds of Willowbottom faded away, replaced by a profound silence, broken only by the soft whisper of leaves overhead. He made his way carefully to the ancient willow, which seemed to be waiting for him. Kneeling at its roots, Milo removed the herbal offerings from his pack and placed them in a small circle. Then he filled the copper lantern with the moonflower oil and lit it with steady hands. The flame caught, burning with unusual clarity, casting a silvery light that seemed to push back the gathering darkness. The silver acorn against his chest had grown so warm it was almost hot, and the inscriptions glowed with a blue luminescence that pulsed like a heartbeat. Milo lifted the pouch from around his neck, opened it, and held the acorn in his palm. "I come with respect," he said, voice clear in the silence of the woods. "I seek to understand the deeper songs of the world, to hear the voices that speak from the roots of time. I ask for safe passage along the pathways between worlds, and promise to carry what I learn back to those who have forgotten." For a long moment, nothing happened. The words hung in the air, and Milo began to wonder if perhaps he had done something wrong, or if the magic of the silver acorn was not what Boffin and Tansy had believed it to be. Then, the willow moved, not in the usual way trees move, swaying in the wind, but with deliberate purpose. Its branches lifted and parted, revealing a hollow in its massive trunk that Milo was certain hadn't been there before. From within this hollow, came a soft, greenish light, pulsating in time with the blue glow of the acorn in his palm. And there was music, not the kind played on hobbit fiddles or flutes at festivals, but something deeper and stranger, like the sound of sap flowing through ancient wood, of roots drawing nutrients from the soil, of leaves unfurling in the spring sunshine. It was the music of growing things, of life itself in its slowest and most patient form. The silver acorn lifted from Milo's palm, hovering in the air before him. Then, with a flash of brilliant light, it shot toward the hollow in the willow's trunk, where it hovered, spinning slowly. Milo understood. This was the doorway, and the acorn was the key that had opened it. With trembling legs, he rose to his feet, gathered his pack and the copper lantern, and approached the hollow. The opening was just large enough for a hobbit to pass through comfortably, though Milo suspected it would have seemed impossibly small to a human or elf. As he ducked his head and stepped through, the music grew louder, surrounding him, flowing through him. The green light enveloped him, and for a moment he felt weightless, as though floating in the gentle current of a summer stream. Then his feet touched solid ground once more, and Milo found himself standing in a forest unlike any he had ever seen. The trees here were immense, their trunks wider than hobbit holes, their tops lost in a canopy so high above that it seemed like another sky. They were ancient beyond reckoning, yet vibrant with life. Some bore leaves of silver and gold that chimed softly as they moved. Others had bark that glowed with an inner light, illuminating the forest floor with patches of multicolored radiance. The air was rich with fragrant cespecy, sweet, earthy, fresh each breath, a symphony of scents. And everywhere there was the music he had heard before, louder now and more complex, as if the very forest was an orchestra, and each living thing within it played its own unique part. Milo looked back, half expecting to see the hollow in the willow trunk through which he had entered, but there was only more forest stretching away behind him. The silver acorn hovered at his shoulder, glowing brightly, then slowly drifted forward, along what appeared to be a path winding between the massive trees. Taking a deep breath, Milo followed, holding his copper lantern high. The silver light it cast seemed to interact with the natural illumination of the forest, creating patterns in the air that shifted and changed as he walked. Time behaved strangely here. Milo could not tell if minutes or hours passed as he followed the path. The forest remained in a state of perpetual twilight, neither day nor night, but perfectly balanced between the two, the essence of the equinox preserved in this otherworldly realm. As Milo ventured deeper into the enchanted forest, the silver acorn floated ahead, guiding him along winding paths that seemed to shift and change when he wasn't looking directly at them. Small creatures, unlike any he had seen in the Shire, darted among the undergrowth, some resembling foxes with butterfly wings, others like rabbits with antlers or squirrels with luminous tails that left trails of sparkling light as they bounded from branch to branch. The music of the forest swelled and ebbed around him, sometimes so faint it was barely perceptible, other times so overwhelming that Milo felt it resonating in his very bones. He began to discern patterns in it, phrases that repeated and evolved, like questions being asked and answered in a language just beyond his comprehension. After what might have been hours or mere minutes, the path opened into a circular clearing dominated by a single tree that dwarfed even the giants surrounding it. Its trunk was as wide as the Green Dragon Inn, its bark a mosaic of colors that shifted like oil on water. Its branches reached so high that Milo could not see where they ended, and its roots created an intricate network of arches and hollows at its base. The silver acorn darted toward this magnificent tree, coming to rest in a small depression in its trunk that seemed perfectly shaped to hold it. As the acorn settled into place, a ripple of light spread outward through the tree, running along its branches and down into its roots, illuminating the entire clearing with a gentle radiance. Then, to Milo's astonishment, the tree spoke. "Welcome, small one," it said, its voice like the rustling of countless leaves, deep and ancient, yet somehow gentle. "Few of your kind have walked these paths in recent ages." Milo swallowed hard, clutching his copper lantern for reassurance. "Thank you for receiving me," he managed to reply, giving a small bow. "I am Milo Burrows of Willowbottom in the Shire." A sound like the creaking of branches in a strong wind emanated from the tree, and Milo realized it was laughing not mockingly, but with genuine mirth. Names are curious things, the tree mused. In your few years, you have had but one. I have had many throughout the long ages, given by different peoples in different tongues. The elves call me Alderon, Lord of the Forest. The dwarves name me Faun, the Ancient One. Men have forgotten my name entirely, though once they knew it well. The tree's roots shifted slightly, creating what almost seemed like a seat at its base. Rest yourself, Milo Burrows of Willow Bottom. You have journeyed far, though you know not how far. Gratefully, Milo settled onto the root seat, placing his lantern beside him. Its silver light mingled with the tree's multicolored glow, creating dancing patterns in the air between them. You seek understanding, Alderon continued, to hear the deeper songs of the world. This is a worthy quest, though not without peril. What would you ask of me, bearer of the silver key? Milo hesitated, overwhelmed by the opportunity. Here was a being of such ancient wisdom that it remembered the shaping of the world. What questions could possibly be worthy of such knowledge? Yet in the end, it was his hobbit heart that guided his words. The whispering woods near my home, he began. They seem to remember something that the rest of the Shire has forgotten. What is it that they remember? And why does it matter? Branches swayed overhead as Alderon considered the question. They remember connection, the ancient tree said finally. In the beginning, all things in Arda were bound together in ways now forgotten. Trees spoke to birds, stones sang to stars, and the smallest creatures understood the great patterns of the world. It was a time of harmony before the shadow came and severed many of these connections. Images formed in the air before Milovisions of a world where all living things communed with one another, where forests and mountains and rivers existed in perfect balance, where even the humblest flower played its part in the great symphony of creation. As for why it matters, Alderon continued, that is for you to determine, small one. But consider this, when pieces of a whole are separated, both the pieces and the whole suffer. The Shire you love exists in isolation, protected by borders both seen and unseen, choosing comfort over connection. There is safety in this choice, but also loss. Milo thought of the Shire-lake's rolling hills and peaceful meadows, its bustling markets and cozy hobbit holes. It was a place of great beauty and comfort, but also of insularity. Hobbits rarely ventured beyond their borders, and tales of the wider world were treated as entertaining fictions, rather than truths to be engaged with. Is there a way to restore what was lost? Milo asked. To help the Shire remember its connection to the wider world? Restoration begins with remembrance, Alderon replied, and remembrance with stories. The silver key you carry is more than a mere doorway. It is a vessel of memory, holding tales that stretch back to the first age of the world. It chose you, Milo Burrows, because it sensed in you a keeper of stories. A keeper of stories? Milo echoed, both surprised and oddly pleased by the notion. But I've never been much of a storyteller, not like old Took or even Boffin with his tales of travel. A gentle rustling passed through Alderon's countless leaves. There are many ways to keep a story, the ancient tree said. Some speak them aloud around hearth fires, others write them in books or sing them in songs. But some, like you, keep them in your heart, nurturing them like seeds until they are ready to grow and bear fruit. Milo considered this. It was true that he had always loved hearing tales of the wider world, even if he had never sought adventure himself until now. He collected fragments of lore, snippets of old songs, passages from books long forgotten by most hobbits. Perhaps there was something to what Alderon said. If I am to be a keeper of stories, Milo said thoughtfully, then I should have stories to keep. Will you share some of yours with me, Alderon? The great tree's branches swayed in what might have been approval. I shall show you, rather than merely tell you, Alderon replied, for the tales of the First Age are best experienced rather than simply heard. One of the tree's massive roots rose from the ground, curling through the air until it hovered before Milo's face. At its tip, a small bud formed, then blossomed into a flower unlike any Milo had ever seen, petals of light rather than matter, shifting between all the colors of dawn and dusk. Look into the heart of the bloom, Alderon instructed, and you will see. Milo leaned forward, peering into the center of the luminous flower. At first, he saw only swirling colors, but then the colors coalesced into images, and he found himself witnessing scenes from a world long past. He saw the awakening of the first elves beside the waters of Kivienen, their eyes opening to starlight for the first time. He watched as they named the stars and trees and rivers, giving voice to the world around them. He witnessed their wonder as they discovered that all living things could speak in those early days, the eagles teaching them of winds and heights, the deer showing them forest paths, even the very rocks sharing memories of the shaping of the land. The vision shifted, and Milo saw darkness Falinga shadow creeping across the land, severing the connections between living things one by one. Languages were forgotten, understanding lost, as the creatures of Middle-earth retreated into separate realms of existence. Yet even as the connections frayed, Milo saw how some remained, how certain elves still spoke with trees, how men remembered in dreams and songs, how dwarves heard the whispers of stone in their deep halls, and he saw hobbits, though they knew it not, keeping ancient practices alive in their ceremonies and traditions, May-Day dances that once honored the spring awakening of the forest, harvest festivals that acknowledged the sacrifice of plants for nourishment, even birthday celebrations that echoed the elven reverence for the gift of life. The visions faded, and Milo found himself back in the clearing with Alderon, tears streaming down his face at the beauty and sorrow of what he had witnessed. "Do you understand now?" Alderon asked gently. "I think so," Milo whispered. "The connections aren't truly broken, just forgotten. And remembering is the first step toward healing." "Yes," Alderon's voice rumbled approval. "And that is why the Silver Key chose you, little one. For you have the heart to remember, and the courage to share what you remember, even if others may not wish to hear it." The massive tree shifted slightly, roots rearranging themselves. "But there is more you must see before you return to your Shire. For the story is not only of the past, but of the present and the future as well." The luminous flower before Milo changed, its petals folding and unfolding to reveal new visions. Now he saw the Shire as it currently existed, a place of beauty and peace, but surrounded by an invisible wall of forgetting. The hobbits went about their daily lives unaware of the ancient forest songs still echoing beneath their feet, the star memories twinkling above their heads, the river wisdom flowing past their mills. Then the vision changed again, and Milo saw two possible futures unfolding. In one, the Shire remained isolated, its people content but increasingly disconnected from the wider world, until a darkness came that they were unprepared to face. In the other, small bridges of understanding were built hobbits who remembered the old connections, who spoke to trees and listened to stones, who recognized the patterns of the stars and the wisdom of rivers. When darkness came to this Shire, it found a people ready to stand alongside elves and men and dwarves, each bringing their unique gifts to the common defense. "The future is not fixed," Alderon said as the visions faded once more, "but it is shaped by choices made in the present. You stand at such a choice point now, Milo Burrows of Willowbottom." Milo sat quietly for a long moment, absorbing all he had seen and heard. The weight of responsibility settled upon his shoulders, not crushing him, but grounding him in a newfound purpose. "What must I do?" he asked finally, looking up at the great tree towering above him. "How do I help the Shire remember?" "The silver key you carry is both a doorway and a vessel," Alderon explained. "It has shown you the pathways between worlds, but its true purpose is to collect and preserve stories, memories of connection that might otherwise be lost. Each time you witness such a memory, the key absorbs it, becoming a repository of ancient wisdom." As if responding to Alderon's words, the silver acorn detached itself from the tree and floated back to Milo, hovering before him. In its polished surface, Milo could see reflections of the visions he had just experienced, captured and preserved within the metallic depths. "Take the key with you when you return," Alderon continued. "Place it near your heart when you sleep, and it will reveal more memories to you in dreams. Share these stories with those who will listen, perhaps not all at once, but slowly, like seeds planted in fertile soil. Some will take root, others will not, but each shared memory creates the possibility of renewed connection." Milo cupped his hands, and the silver acorn settled gently into his palms, warm and comforting. He carefully returned it to the embroidered pouch around his neck. "But there is another task before you leave this realm," Alderon said, the ancient tree's voice growing more serious. "For the balance of giving and receiving must be maintained. You have been given visions and understanding. Now you must give something in return." What could I possibly offer to a being as ancient and wise as you? Milo asked, genuinely perplexed. Alderon's leaves rustled softly. Something only a hobbit could provide a story from the Shire. A tale of your people's connection to the world around them, even if they do not recognize it as such. For even in forgetting, hobbits have preserved fragments of the old ways in their customs and celebrations. Milo thought for a moment, then smiled. There is a story my grandmother told me, passed down through generations of Burrow's hobbits. It's about the coming of spring to the Shire, and why we dance around the maypole with ribbons. And so, beneath the towering presence of Alderon, Milo shared the tale of how, long ago, a terrible winter had gripped the Shire, lasting far longer than any before it. Food stores dwindled, illness spread, and hope faded. In desperation, a young hobbit girl ventured into the woods that bordered the Shire in those days, seeking help from the trees that still whispered with ancient wisdom. The trees taught her a dancer-weaving pattern that mimicked the way roots intertwine beneath the soil, sharing strength and nourishment. When she returned to the Shire, she taught this dance to the other hobbits, who performed it around a living tree sapling. Their dancing feet stamped life back into the frozen ground, their woven ribbons symbolizing the reconnection of hobbits to the earth's rhythms. Spring returned, the land flourished, and hobbits never forgot the dance, though most forgot its meaning. We still perform that dance every spring, Milo concluded. The ribbons are brighter now, and the music more cheerful, but the pattern remains the serene, unconscious remembrance of connection to the cycles of the earth. A sound like wind through countless leaves filled the clearing. Alderon's sigh of appreciation. This is a worthy offering, Milo Burrows. The memory of that dance was indeed a gift from the forest to your people, and in preserving it, hobbits have kept alive a thread of the old connection, even without knowing it. As Milo finished his story, he noticed subtle changes in the forest around them. The perpetual twilight was shifting, stars becoming visible through the canopy overhead, while simultaneously a golden glow like dawn began to illuminate the edges of the clearing. The equinox draws to its close in your world, Alderon observed. Soon the path between realms will close until the next time of perfect balance. You must return now, bearer of the silver key, keeper of stories. Milo stood, gathering his lantern and pack. Will I be able to return, to learn more stories, to see more memories? The silver key will guide you when the time is right, Alderon replied. On other days of balance the solstices, the equinoxes the pathway may open to you again. But remember, Milo Burrows, that the true journey is not the one between realms, but the one you make in your own heart and in the hearts of those who hear your stories. One of Alderon's roots rose from the ground, pointing toward a path that Milo was certain hadn't been there before. Narrow winding trail illuminated by glowing mushrooms and iridescent moths that fluttered just above the forest floor. Follow this path, Alderon instructed. It will lead you back to your own realm, to the ancient willow that guards the doorway between worlds. Go with the blessing of the elder trees, little one. May your steps be light and your stories true. Milo followed the luminous path through the enchanted forest, guided by the dancing moths and the soft glow of mushrooms at his feet. The silver acorn against his chest pulsed with warmth, as though eager to return to the Shire with its precious cargo of memories and stories. As he walked, Milo found himself humming a melody he had never heard before, yet somehow knew by heart-own of the ancient forest songs revealed to him in his visions. The forest around him gradually changed, the immense trees giving way to smaller ones, the multicolored light fading into the more familiar silver grey of twilight. Ahead, Milo could see the massive form of a willow tree, its branches swaying gently, though there was no wind. As he approached, he recognized it as the ancient willow of Willowbottom, the guardian of the doorway between worlds. A hollow opened in its trunk, glowing with the same greenish light he had seen before. Taking a deep breath, Milo stepped through, feeling once again the strange, weightless sensation, as though floating in a gentle current. Then his feet touched solid ground, and he found himself standing at the edge of the whispering woods. The familiar hills of Willowbottom spread out before him under a starry sky. Had any time passed? The position of the stars suggested that it was still the night of the equinox, perhaps only hours after he had entered the woods. Yet Milo felt as though he had been away for days, or perhaps years. His body was unchanged, but his heart and mind had been transformed by what he had witnessed in the realm of the elder trees. As he made his way back to his hobbit hole, Milo noticed details he had never paid attention to before: the way certain plants turned their leaves to follow the star's passage, how the night creatures sang to one another in patterns that formed a complex dialogue, the subtle shift in the earth beneath his feet as it breathed in the night air. The world was alive in ways he had never fully appreciated, every part connected to every other in the great web of existence that Alderaan had shown him. His hobbit hole welcomed him home, everything exactly as he had left it earlier that day. Milo lit his hearth fire, made a cup of chamomile tea, and sat in his favorite armchair, cradling the silver acorn in his palm. Its glow had dimmed somewhat, but the inscriptions remained clear, shifting slightly as he turned it in the firelight. "A keeper of stories," he murmured to himself, smiling at the thought. "Where shall I begin?" The answer came in the days that followed. Milo began simply, inviting neighborhood children to his garden for afternoon story sessions. He would sit under his apple tree, the silver acorn hanging from a chain around his neck, and share tales of talking animals and singing trees, of stars that remembered the first dawning of the world, and rivers that carried wisdom from mountain to sea. The children were enchanted, returning day after day to hear more. Soon, their parents began to linger at the edges of Milo's garden, pretending to be waiting for their little ones but clearly caught up in the stories themselves. Before long, Milo found himself invited to birthday celebrations and harvest festivals to share his tales. Lily Proudfoot became a regular visitor to Milo's hobbit hole, bringing herbs from her grandmother and staying to help tend his garden. They worked side by side, planting seeds and nurturing growing things, and Milo found that as his stories took root in the hearts of Willowbottom, so too did a special fondness for Lily Blossom in his own heart. Tansy watched their budding relationship with knowing eyes and a gentle smile. "The silver key works in many ways," she told Milo one evening as they sat on her porch, watching fireflies dance in the twilight. "Connection takes many forms between worlds, between people, between past and present. During the winter solstice, when night reached its longest point and the balance between darkness and light shifted once more, Milo returned to the ancient willow. With Lily at his side this time, he placed new offerings at the tree's roots and held the silver acorn in his outstretched hand. The hollow appeared as before, and together they stepped through into the realm of the elder trees, where Alderaan welcomed them with rustling approval. "The weaving continues," the ancient tree observed, as Milo and Lily shared the small changes happening in Willowbottom, how children now sang to plants as they grew, how farmers listened to the whispers of the soil before planting, how even the most practical hobbits had begun to notice patterns in the stars and signs in the behavior of birds. When spring came to the Shire, the May Day celebration in Willowbottom took on new meaning. The ribbons around the maypole were woven with special care, each color representing a different element of the natural world: green for growing things, blue for waters, gold for sunlight, silver for starlight. As the hobbits danced, Milo watched from the sidelines, the silver acorn warm against his chest, and saw how the patterns of their movement matched those of roots intertwining beneath the soil, of branches reaching toward the sun, of stars wheeling across the night sky. It was a small beginning, this remembrance of connection, but it was enough. The silver acorn had chosen wisely in selecting its keeper, for Milo understood that great changes begin with small stories, shared heart to heart, passed from one generation to the next like precious heirlooms. And, as the years flowed by, like a gentle stream winding through the peaceful countryside, the hobbits of Willowbottom became known throughout the Shire for their unusual customs and strange tales. Some dismissed them as eccentric, of course, but others found themselves drawn to the little community where trees were greeted like old friends, where festivals followed the ancient rhythms of the earth, and where the boundaries between the everyday world and the realm of wonder had grown just a little bit thinner. For as Milo Burrows knew well, the most important connections are those we nurture in our hearts, keeping alive the memory of our place in the great song of creation. Story 2. In the gentle rolling hills of the Shire, where the grass grew as green as emeralds and the sky stretched endlessly blue above, there lived a hobbit named Marigold Brandybuck. Unlike many hobbits who preferred the comforts of hearth and home above all else, Marigold harbored a particular fondness for gardening under the light of the moon. While other hobbits tucked themselves into their cozy beds after supper, Marigold would often slip outside with a small lantern to tend to her special night garden, a hobby that had earned her curious glances from her neighbors. but also a certain respectful admiration. Her garden was unlike any other in Hobbiton, filled with plants that only revealed their true beauty when bathed in moonlight. Silver-leafed herbs that gleamed like polished metal, pale flowers that unfurled their petals only when the stars emerged, and curious vines that seemed to sway in time with the evening breeze, as though dancing to some unheard melody. The garden was Marigold's pride and joy, a sanctuary of peace in the already tranquil Shire. On one particularly fine autumn evening, as the harvest moon hung full and golden in the sky, Marigold was gifted a most unusual seed by an old friend of the family, a wandering wizard who occasionally passed through the Shire on his mysterious journeys. The wizard, whose name was seldom spoken but whose grey robes and kind eyes were unmistakable, presented the seed to Marigold with a gentle smile. "This, my dear Marigold," he said, his voice as soft as the rustling leaves, "is a moonflower seed from the gardens of the elven kingdom of Rivendell. Plant it under the light of a full moon, water it with dew collected at dawn, and you shall grow something truly remarkable." Marigold accepted the gift with wide-eyed wonder, cradling the tiny seed in her palm. It was unlike any seed she had ever seen, pearlescent and slightly luminous, as though it had captured a fragment of moonlight within its shell. She thanked the wizard profusely, already imagining how this new addition would enhance her beloved garden. That very night, as the full moon reached its zenith, Marigold ventured into her garden with the precious seed. She had prepared a special spot for it, a small mound of rich, dark soil mixed with a touch of sand from the banks of the Brandywine River, said to hold special properties beneficial to rare and magical plants. With careful fingers, she created a small hollow in the earth and gently placed the seed inside, covering it with the lightest layer of soil. "Grow well, little one," she whispered, sprinkling it with the morning dew she had collected at first light, stored in a small crystal vial that had been her grandmother's. The water glistened like liquid silver as it soaked into the soil, and for a brief moment, Marigold thought she saw a faint glow emanate from the ground where the seed lay buried. Days passed, then weeks, and Marigold began to wonder if the seed would ever sprout. Each night she would check the spot, sometimes sitting beside it for hours, humming old Hobbit lullabies, as though to coax the plant from its slumber. Her neighbours began to whisper that perhaps the wizard had played a trick on her, or that the magic of elven plants was not meant to flourish in the humble soil of the Shire. But Marigold's patience was rewarded one evening when the moon was once again full in the sky. As she approached the spot where the seed had been planted, she noticed a small silvery shoot had broken through the soil. It seemed to pulse with a gentle inner light, and as Marigold watched, breathless with amazement, the shoot grew visibly taller, unfurling tiny leaves that shimmered like polished mithril. "Oh!" she gasped softly, dropping to her knees beside the miraculous plant. "You're beautiful." Night after night, Marigold tended to the moonflower with loving care. She sang to it in the language of old Hobbit gardeners, a mixture of common tongue and ancient words passed down through generations of those with a special touch for growing things. She watered it faithfully with morning dew and occasionally added a drop of honeymead to the soil, a trick her father had taught her for encouraging reluctant bloomers. Under her attentive care, the moonflower thrived. Its stem grew tall and strong, twining gracefully around the small trellis Marigold had crafted for it from willow branches. Its leaves expanded, silver blue and delicately veined, reminiscent of butterfly wings. But still, it had not bloomed, the buds remaining tightly closed like small luminous pearls. "Perhaps it needs something more," Marigold mused one evening, sitting cross-legged beside the plant, her chin resting on her hands as she contemplated the mystery. It was then that she remembered something the wizard had mentioned in passing before he departed. Something about the moonflower responding to song, to music that resonated with the heart of the one who tended it. Marigold had a pleasant singing voice, though she rarely shared it beyond the confines of her garden. She knew many old songs, lullabies, and ballads passed down through generations of hobbits, but somehow none of them seemed quite right for this occasion. So, in the soft light of the moon, with only the stars as her audience, Marigold began to create a song of her own. It was a simple melody at first, hummed softly as she weeded around the base of the moonflower, but gradually, words began to form, a gentle ballad about moonlight and dreams, about seeds that slumber beneath the earth, only to awaken transformed into something beautiful and new. As her voice carried through the night air, something extraordinary happened. The buds of the moonflower began to tremble, ever so slightly, as though responding to the vibrations of her song. Encouraged, Marigold sang more boldly, her clear voice rising and falling like the gentle waves of a serene lake under moonlight. And then, as though awakening from a long sleep, the first bud of the moonflower began to unfurl its petals. The petals unfurled with graceful slowness, like dancers extending their arms. Each petal was as white as fresh snow, but seemed to contain all the colors of moonlight within silver, pale blue, and the faintest hint of lavender. As they opened fully, the flower's heart was revealed, a center of spun gold that pulsed with a gentle, hypnotic rhythm, as though the flower itself were breathing. Marigold sat transfixed, her song fading to a whisper, and then to silence as she watched the miracle unfold before her. The moonflower's perfume filled the garden, a scent unlike anything she had ever experienced, sweet yet subtle, reminiscent of vanilla and honey, but with an otherworldly quality that reminded her of starlight, if starlight had a fragrance. "Oh my," she breathed, reaching out a tentative finger to touch the edge of one luminous petal. It felt like velvet beneath her fingertip, cool and impossibly soft. At her touch, the flower seemed to brighten momentarily, as though acknowledging her presence. That night, Marigold could hardly bring herself to leave the garden. She sat beside the moonflower until the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn. As the stars faded and the moon sank below the horizon, the beautiful bloom slowly closed its petals once more, folding in on itself like a precious secret being tucked away. Word of Marigold's extraordinary flower spread quickly through Hobbiton, as news often does in small communities where little of excitement tends to happen. Soon, neighbors began to appear at her garden gate in the evenings, hoping for a glimpse of the magical bloom that only showed itself by moonlight. Marigold, being a generous soul, welcomed them in small groups, serving tea and seed cakes as they waited for nightfall and the opening of the moonflower's blossoms. Night after night, more flowers bloomed along the silver stem, each one perfect and radiant, until a cascade of luminous blooms adorned the trellis. Among her visitors was a peculiar hobbit named Fosco Boffin, known throughout the Shire as something of a collector of curiosities. Unlike most hobbits who valued comfort and simplicity above all, Fosco had a thirst for the unusual and the exotic. His hobbit hole was filled with strange artifacts gathered from the few travels he had undertaken beyond the borders of the Shire dwarf-made music box that played tunes no hobbit had heard before, stones that glimmered with inner fire, and pressed flowers from distant meadows. Fosco's eyes gleamed with intensity as he beheld Marigold's moonflower, his fingers fidgeting at his sides as though he could barely restrain himself from reaching out to touch it. "Extraordinary," he murmured, circling the plant with undisguised fascination. "Truly extraordinary. And you say it was a gift from a wizard? The Grey Wanderer himself?" Marigold nodded, suddenly uneasy beneath his avid gaze. There was something in his expression that made her want to stand protectively between him and her precious plant. "Would you consider parting with a cutting?" Fosco asked, attempting to mask his eagerness with an air of casual inquiry. "I would compensate you most generously, of course. Such a treasure deserves proper appreciation." "I'm afraid not," Marigold replied firmly. "The wizard was quite specific that the plant requires special care. And besides," she added with a gentle smile, hoping to soften her refusal, "it seems happy here. I wouldn't want to disturb its growth." Fosco's smile tightened almost imperceptibly, but he nodded and said no more on the matter. He stayed later than the other visitors that evening, asking detailed questions about the plant's care and watching intently as Marigold sang her nightly song to the moonflower, causing its petals to quiver with what appeared to be delight. When at last he took his leave, Marigold found herself exhaling a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She could not explain her unease. Fosco had been perfectly polite, if a bit intense. Yet something in her heart warned her to be cautious. The following evening, Marigold noticed that one of the smaller buds on the moonflower plant had been neatly snipped off. Her heart sank as she examined the clean cut that could only have been made by careful scissors or a sharp knife. She knew instantly who had taken it, though she had no proof. The thought of Fosco attempting to grow her precious moonflower in his collection of curiosities filled her with a strange sense of dread. That night, the remaining flowers seemed less vibrant than before, their glow dimmed as though in mourning for their lost sibling. Marigold sang to them with extra tenderness, apologizing for failing to protect them properly. As her song drifted through the garden, she thought she heard a faint, answering melodia whisper of music so delicate that she wondered if it was merely her imagination. But no, there it was again, a gentle humming that seemed to emanate from the flowers themselves. The sound was ethereal yet somehow familiar, reminding Marigold of the lullabies her mother had sung to her as a child. The moonflowers swayed slightly, their petals vibrating with the sound. It was then that Marigold understood. The moonflowers were not merely plants, but living, sentient beings in their own right. The wizard had not simply given her a rare seed. He had entrusted her with a life, a consciousness from a realm beyond the simple understanding of hobbits. And now, part of that consciousness had been taken. As if confirming her thoughts, the largest bloom on the plant fully opened its petals and, to Marigold's astonishment, a tiny figure stepped forth from within the golden center of the flower. No taller than her thumb, the figure glowed with the same luminescence as the petals surrounding it. Delicate, translucent wings, like those of a dragonfly but shimmering with moonlight, extended from its back. The tiny figure bowed gracefully to Marigold, who remained frozen in astonishment, hardly daring to breathe lest this wondrous vision vanish before her eyes. When the creature spoke, its voice was like the tinkling of the smallest silver bells, clear and melodious. "Greetings, kind gardener," it said. "I am Lumina, a moonflower fairy. My kin and I have dwelled within the blossoms you have so lovingly tended." I'm honored," Marigold managed to stammer, sinking to her knees to better address the diminutive being. "I had no idea that such wonderful creatures lived within the flowers." Lumina's expression grew solemn, her luminescent features dimming slightly. "We have lived in harmony with the moonflowers for countless ages, guardian spirits of these sacred blooms. But now, one of our sisters has been taken, stolen away in her sleeping bud. We can sense her distress, her confusion, as she is carried far from the moonlight and song that sustains her." Marigold felt her cheeks flush with shame. "I'm so sorry. I should have been more careful. A hobbit named Fosco Boffin was here yesterday, and I suspect he took the cutting. He's a collector of unusual things, you see, and was very interested in the moonflower." Lumina fluttered her delicate wings, rising slightly from the petal where she stood. "If our sister remains separated from us, both she and her moonflower will wither and perish. And worse, the severed connection creates a wound in the fabric that binds us all together. Already the other blooms grow dimmer, their light fading as our collective strength diminishes." "What can I do?" Marigold asked, her heart heavy with responsibility. "How can I make this right?" "You must retrieve our sister and return her to the garden," Lumina replied. "But you must hurry. With each passing night, her life force will weaken further. By the time the moon wanes to a sliver, it may be too late." Marigold nodded firmly, a determination taking root within her that was as strong and steady as the oak trees that grew at the borders of the Shire. "I'll go to Fosco's home first thing tomorrow and get your sister back. I promise." Lumina bowed once more, her wings casting tiny rainbows in the moonlight. "We thank you, gentle hobbit. For now, we ask one more thing, Will. You sing for us? Your song strengthens our connection to this realm and soothes our troubled spirits." So, Marigold sang, her voice weaving through the night garden like silver threads, connecting her to the fairies and their moonflowers in ways she couldn't fully comprehend but deeply felt. As she sang, more tiny fairies emerged from their blossoms, dancing in graceful spirals above the garden, their bodies leaving trails of stardust in the air. It was the most beautiful sight Marigold had ever beheld, and despite her worry for the missing fairy, her heart swelled with joy at being witness to such magic. She sang until her voice grew hoarse, and the moon began its descent toward the horizon. As dawn approached, the fairies returned to their floral havens, each bowing to Marigold before disappearing once more into the heart of their respective blooms. Lumina was the last to retreat. "Remember," she said softly, "our time grows short. The new moon approaches in 7 days. By then, our sister must be returned." "I will not fail you," Marigold promised, and watched as Lumina's glow merged once more with the golden center of her moonflower. Morning found Marigold at Fosco Boffin's elaborately decorated front door, her heart pounding with nervous energy. but her resolve unwavering. She had never been one for confrontation. Most hobbits weren't, but the image of the tiny, distressed fairy gave her courage she hadn't known she possessed. She knocked firmly, straightening her simple gardening dress and patting her curly hair into some semblance of order. After a moment, the door swung open to reveal Fosco himself, his eyebrows rising in surprise at the sight of her. "Marigold Brandybuck," he exclaimed with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "What an unexpected pleasure. Do come in." Marigold stepped into the hobbit hole, immediately struck by the overwhelming collection of objects that filled every available space. Shelves lined the walls, crammed with peculiar items crystals that seemed to shift color as she looked at them. Feathers of birds she couldn't name, small bottles containing swirling mists of varying hues. The air was heavy with the scent of exotic spices and preserved herbs. "I've come about the moonflower cutting," Marigold said directly, seeing no benefit in pretending this was a social call. "I know you took it, Fosco, and I need it back. Immediately." Fosco's pleasant expression faltered, then reformed into a thin smile. "My dear Marigold, whatever do you mean? I merely admired your lovely plant. Why would I?" "Please don't," Marigold interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. "I saw where the cutting was taken, and I know it was you. The plant is special. More special than either of us initially realized. If the cutting isn't returned to the parent plant soon, something precious will be lost forever." Fosco studied her for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the carved wooden walking stick he always carried, despite having no apparent need for it. Finally, he sighed. "Very well," he said, turning and gesturing for her to follow him deeper into his cluttered home. "You are correct. I did take a small cutting, but I assure you it was with the best of intentions. Such a marvel deserves to be propagated, studied. I've already begun preparations to root the cutting in a special medium I acquired from a dwarf herbalist." Marigold followed Fosco through winding corridors lined with display cases, containing everything from preserved butterfly specimens to what appeared to be a dragon's tooth mounted on velvet. Under different circumstances, she might have found the collection fascinating, but now she felt only growing unease. They arrived at a small indoor conservatory, a glass-walled room built into the side of the hobbit hole that captured the sunlight. Unlike the rest of Fosco's cluttered home, this space was meticulously organized. Plants of every description grew in carefully labeled pots and trays, many of which Marigold had never seen before. Some had leaves that appeared to be made of glass, others bore fruits that glowed faintly in the shadows, and one particularly unusual specimen seemed to be breathing, its bulbous pods expanding and contracting rhythmically. In the center of the room, on a pedestal bathed in the strongest shaft of sunlight, sat the moonflower cutting in a crystal vase. Even in the daylight, it maintained a faint, silvery luminescence, though it looked far less vibrant than it had in Marigold's garden. The petals were partially closed, as was natural during daylight hours, but they had a wilted appearance that made Marigold's heart clench with worry. "You see, I've given it a place of honor," Fosco said proudly, gesturing toward the cutting. "The perfect amount of light, the finest spring water. By next full moon, I expect it will have rooted and begun to grow, perhaps even bloom again." "It won't," Marigold said softly, approaching the pedestal. "It's dying, Fosco. Can't you see?" Fosco frowned, leaning in to examine the cutting more closely. "Nonsense. It's merely adapting to its new environment. All transplants experience some shock initially." "This isn't an ordinary plant," Marigold insisted. "It needs moonlight, not sunlight. It needs the songs I sing to it each night. And most importantly, it needs to be reconnected to the parent plant before the new moon." "Moonlight instead of sunlight? Songs?" Fosco's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "What aren't you telling me about this plant, Marigold Brandybuck?" Marigold hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal. Fosco clearly had a deep interest in the rare and magical. But would knowing about the faeries make him more determined to keep the cutting? Or would the knowledge that a living being was suffering persuade him to return it? She decided that truth was her only option. "The moonflowers are home to faeries, Fosco. Tiny, luminescent beings who dwell within the blossoms. When you took this cutting, you separated one of these fairies from her sisters. She's fading away, just as the flower is." Fosco's expression transformed from skepticism to wonder to intense fascination in the span of seconds. Fairies? Actual, living fairies? He circled the pedestal, scrutinizing the moonflower cutting with renewed interest. "Are you quite certain? I've collected tales and artifacts related to the fair folk for years, but to actually possess one." "You don't possess her," Marigold said firmly, alarmed by his choice of words. "She's a free being who needs her family and her home. Please, Fosco, let me take the cutting back before it's too late." Fosco stroked his chin thoughtfully. "I'd need proof, of course. These fairies, do they show themselves? Speak? Perform magic? They emerged last night when I sang to them," Marigold explained, her patience wearing thin. "They dance and sing and glow like stars come down to earth, but they only reveal themselves under moonlight, and only to those they trust. And right now, this one is probably terrified and hiding." "Then we shall wait until moonrise," Fosco declared, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "You shall sing to the cutting, the fairy will emerge, and I shall finally have proof of what I've long suspected, that magic still dwells in the quiet corners of Middle-earth, even here in our humble Shire." "But—" "No buts," Fosco interrupted, suddenly stern. "Either you help me witness this wonder, or the cutting stays with me regardless. Those are my terms, Marigold." Marigold felt trapped. She could try to grab the cutting and flee, but Fosco was between her and the only exit, and despite his scholarly appearance, he was still considerably larger and stronger than she was. She could return after dark and try to steal it back, but what if he moved it to a more secure location in the meantime? With a heavy heart, she nodded her agreement. "Very well. At moonrise, but I warn you, Fosco, the fairy may be too weakened to appear. And if she doesn't, I still expect you to return the cutting to me." Fosco smiled, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "We shall see, my dear, we shall see." The hours until moonrise passed with excruciating slowness for Marigold. Fosco insisted she remain as his guest, ostensibly offering hospitality but clearly ensuring she wouldn't leave and return with reinforcements. He served her tea and cakes in his cluttered sitting room, chattering incessantly about his collection and the lengths to which he had gone to acquire certain pieces. Under different circumstances, Marigold might have found his tales fascinating adventures involving dwarven traders, mysterious merchants from the distant east, and even a chance encounter with elves passing through the Shire on their way to the Grey Havens. But her thoughts remained with the imprisoned fairy and the withering moonflower cutting. As the sun began to set, Fosco became increasingly agitated with excitement, constantly checking the window for the first sign of the rising moon. When at last a silvery glow appeared on the eastern horizon, he practically pulled Marigold from her chair. "It's time," he exclaimed, leading her back to the conservatory. "Now we shall see these fairies of yours, and I shall add a new chapter to my collection of rare phenomena." The moonlight filtered through the glass ceiling of the conservatory, casting ethereal shadows across the collection of exotic plants. Fosco moved the pedestal with the moonflower cutting into the brightest shaft of silver light, his hands trembling with anticipation. "Now, Marigold," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sing to it. Summon this fairy for me to behold." Marigold approached the wilting cutting, her heart heavy with concern. Up close, it looked even worse than it had earlier. The edges of the petals had begun to brown, and the silvery glow that should have intensified in the moonlight remained dull and muted. "I'll try," she said softly, "but please remember, she's frightened and weakened. Don't make any sudden movements or try to touch her if she appears." Fosco nodded impatiently, his eyes never leaving the moonflower, as he settled into a chair he had positioned for optimal viewing. Marigold took a deep breath and began to sing the melody she had created for the moonflowers, her voice gentle and soothing despite her inner turmoil. At first, nothing happened. The moonflower remained still, its petals barely stirring in the slight draft that flowed through the conservatory. Marigold sang with increasing desperation, trying to infuse her voice with all the tenderness and reassurance she could muster. After what seemed an eternity, a faint glow began to emanate from the heart of the bloom. It pulsed weakly, like the heartbeat of a wounded bird. Fosco leaned forward, his breath catching in his throat. "Yes," he whispered. "Yes, come forth, little one. Show yourself to Fosco Boffin." The glow flickered uncertainly, and then, with painful slowness, a tiny figure emerged from within the flower. This fairy was clearly the sister of Lumina and the others, but where they had been vibrant and luminous, she appeared faded, almost translucent. Her wings drooped at her sides, and the light she emitted was a pale shadow of what it should have been. "Oh," Marigold gasped, tears springing to her eyes. "Oh, you poor thing." Fosco's reaction was quite different. He leapt to his feet, hands clasped together, in undisguised delight. Extraordinary, simply extraordinary. A genuine fairy, right here in my conservatory. Can she speak? Ask her to speak to me. The sudden movement and loud voice caused the fairy to cower back against the petals of her flower. She attempted to retreat into the bloom but seemed too weak to fully disappear. "Fosco, please," Marigold pleaded. "You're frightening her. She's very ill, can't you see that?" But Fosco was beyond reason, captivated by the realization of his lifelong fascination. He moved closer, peering at the diminutive being with unbridled curiosity. "What is your name, little one? How old are you? Are there many more like you? Do you possess magical abilities?" The fairy trembled visibly, her glow dimming further with each question hurled at her. She turned her tiny face toward Marigold, and though she made no sound, her expression was one of such profound distress that Marigold felt it like a physical pain in her chest. "Enough!" Marigold cried, stepping between Fosco and the pedestal. "Can't you see you're killing her? She needs to go home, back to her sisters and the parent plant. I'm taking her now." Fosco's expression darkened. "You will do no such thing. This is the discovery of a lifetime proof that the old tales are true. I must observe her, study her. Think of the knowledge to be gained." "She is not a specimen for your collection," Marigold insisted, her voice rising with uncharacteristic anger. "She's a living being who's suffering. What good is your knowledge if it comes at the cost of her life?" As they argued, neither noticed that the moonflower's petals had begun to curl inward, browning rapidly around the edges. The fairy's glow flickered like a candle in a strong wind, growing fainter by the second. It was only when a soft musical sigh reached their ears that they turned back to the pedestal. The fairy had collapsed onto the center of the flower, her luminescence barely visible now. The moonflower itself seemed to be withering before their eyes, the silver sheen that had made it so remarkable fading to a dull grey. "What's happening?" Fosco demanded, alarm replacing his excitement. "What's wrong with it?" "She's dying," Marigold said simply, tears streaming down her face. "They both are. The fairy and the flower are connected. One cannot survive without the other, and neither can endure separation from the parent plant for long. I told you this would happen." Fosco stared at the rapidly deteriorating cutting, his expression torn between distress at losing his prize and genuine horror at what was unfolding before him. For the first time, it seemed to dawn on him that his pursuit of the extraordinary had very real consequences. "Take it," he said abruptly, backing away from the pedestal. "Take it back to your garden. Quickly, before it's too late." Marigold didn't hesitate. She carefully lifted the crystal vase, cradling it against her chest, as though it contained the most precious treasure in all of Middle-earth, which, to her, it did. "I'll return the vase tomorrow," she promised, already moving toward the door. "But now, I must hurry." Fosco merely nodded, his earlier enthusiasm replaced by a somber thoughtfulness as he watched her depart. Marigold ran through the darkened paths of Hobbiton, cradling the vase against her chest, heedless of the curious glances from the few hobbits still out and about in the evening. Her heart pounded with fear and hope in equal measure. The moonflower's condition deteriorated, with each passing moment, its once lustrous petals now curling and browning at the edges, its stem beginning to droop despite the water in the vase. "Hold on, little one," she whispered breathlessly to the fairy who lay motionless at the heart of the flower. "We're almost home. Just a little longer." The night air was cool against her flushed face as she took the shortcut through Farmer Maggot's cornfield, something she would never have dared under normal circumstances. But these were far from normal circumstances, and the minutes saved might make all the difference between life and death for the moonflower and its fairy inhabitant. By the time Marigold burst into her garden, she was gasping for breath, her curly hair disheveled and her dress muddied from a fall she had taken in her haste. But none of that mattered as she approached the parent plant, which seemed to sense her presence. The blooms that remained turned toward her, their petals quivering slightly, as though in anticipation. Lumina emerged from the largest flower, her light dimming when she saw the condition of her sister. "Quickly," she urged, her tiny voice tight with concern. "Place the cutting as close as possible to the main stem. Marigold carefully removed the cutting from the vase and positioned it against the base of the parent plant, where the severed end could touch the main stem. As soon as contact was made, a soft hum filled the garden, like distant singing that was felt more than heard. A gossamer thin strand of light extended from the parent plant to the cutting, forming a delicate bridge between them. More fairies emerged from their blossoms, flying in a circle around the plant and the cutting, their wings creating a gentle breeze that carried the scent of moonlight and magic through the garden. "What are they doing?" Marigold whispered, afraid to disrupt whatever healing ritual was taking place. "They are sharing their life force," Lumina explained, hovering near Marigold's shoulder, "giving of themselves to restore our sister and her flower. It is our way, one supports all support one." Marigold watched in awe as the circling fairies began to emit a fine, silvery dust that settled on the cutting. Where it touched the browned edges, healthy silver-blue color began to return. The petals slowly unfurled, regaining their former resilience. The fairy within remained motionless, but her glow strengthened slightly. Will she be all right?" Marigold asked anxiously. Lumina's expression was solemn. "Her recovery is not certain. She has been greatly weakened by the separation, but we have hope now, which we did not before. For that, we thank you, kind gardener." The ritual continued through the night, the fairies taking turns in the circle when one tired, always maintaining the flow of healing energy. Marigold sat vigil beside them, occasionally offering her own song to complement their healing magic, though she felt rather insignificant beside such wondrous beings. As dawn approached, the fairies gradually returned to their respective flowers, their energy depleted from the night's efforts. Only Lumina remained, watching over the cutting and her sister, who now glowed with a faint but steady light. "The sun rises," Lumina said softly. "We must rest now, and so should you, Marigold Brandybuck. You have done a brave and kind thing this night." Before Marigold could respond, a faint voice came from the cutting so soft, it might have been merely the whisper of a breeze through leaves. "Thank you," it said, and then fell silent once more. Tears of relief and joy sprang to Marigold's eyes. "You're welcome, little one. Rest now and heal. You're home." Lumina smiled, a tiny radiance in the growing light of dawn. Then she too retreated into her blossom as the flowers closed for the day. Marigold, exhausted but happy, made her way inside her hobbit hole and collapsed into bed, falling into a deep, dreamless sleep. She awoke at midday to a gentle knocking at her door. Groggily, she rose and made her way to the entrance, surprised to find Fosco Boffin standing there, looking rather sheepish and holding a small wooden box. "Good day, Marigold," he said, his usual confident demeanor replaced by an uncharacteristic hesitancy. I hope I haven't disturbed your rest. I wanted to inquire after the moonflower and the fairy." Marigold studied him for a moment, noting the dark circles under his eyes that suggested he too had had a sleepless night. "They're both recovering," she said carefully. "It was a close call, but the other fairies performed some kind of healing ritual. We have hope now." Relief visibly washed over Fosco's features. "I'm glad to hear it, truly." He shifted uncomfortably, then held out the wooden box. "I've brought something. A peace offering, I suppose you could call it. And an apology." Marigold accepted the box cautiously and opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft moss, lay several small crystal vials filled with morning dew, a packet of seeds labelled in Fosco's neat handwriting as "Starlight Herbs Promotes Healing," and a tiny silver bell. "The dew is from the highest reaches of the Shire, where the air is purest," Fosco explained. "The herbs are rare, but they've been known to strengthen ailing plants. And the bell? Well, it's said that the sound of silver can enhance magical energies. I thought perhaps it might help in the fairy's recovery." Marigold stared at the gifts in surprise. This humble offering was so unlike the boastful hobbit, she had come to know that she was momentarily speechless. "Thank you, Fosco," she finally managed, genuinely touched by his gesture. "These will surely help with the recovery." Fosco nodded, the relief evident on his face. That is, would it be possible for me to see them? Not to disturb or collect, I assure you. Merely to make amends, perhaps." Marigold hesitated. The fairies were vulnerable, and Fosco had already proven himself untrustworthy once. And yet, The regret in his eyes seemed genuine, and the gifts he had brought showed thoughtful consideration rather than the grasping acquisitiveness he had displayed before. "You may come back at moonrise," she decided, "but only to observe from a distance. The healing has only just begun, and they need peace and quiet." Of course, Fosco agreed quickly. "I shall be as silent as shadow. You have my word." As Fosco departed, Marigold took the box of gifts to her garden. The morning dew in the crystal vials sparkled in the sunlight, seeming to contain tiny rainbows within each droplet. She carefully added a few drops to the soil around the moonflower plant, saving the rest for evening when the faeries would be active. The day passed slowly, Marigold frequently checking on the moonflower cutting which remained attached to the parent plant by that gossamer strand of light. Though the flowers were closed during daylight hours, she could tell by the healthy silver-blue color of the leaves and stem that healing was taking place. When twilight finally descended, Marigold prepared the garden for the night's vigil. She sprinkled the starlight herbs in a circle around the moonflower plant, their leaves releasing a subtle fragrance like honeysuckle and mint combined. She placed the tiny silver bell on a small pedestal near the cutting, ready to ring it if Lumina indicated it would help. Just as the first silver of the moon rose above the horizon, Fosco arrived as promised. He was dressed more simply than usual, without his typical ornamented waistcoat or the walking stick he normally carried for show. His demeanor, too, was subdued, almost reverential as Marigold led him to a bench at the edge of the garden, positioned to observe, but not intrude. "Remember? Complete silence," Marigold whispered. "They may not show themselves at all if they sense any threat or disturbance." Fosco nodded solemnly, settling onto the bench with his hands folded in his lap, the very picture of patient restraint. Marigold took her usual position near the plant and began her soft, melodious song as moonlight bathed the garden in its gentle glow. The effect was almost immediate. The moonflowers unfurled their petals with more vigor than they had shown the previous night, their luminescence stronger, as though they drew strength from Marigold's voice and the moonlight combined. One by one, faeries emerged from their blooms, each glowing with silver-blue light, their delicate wings catching and refracting the moonbeams. Marigold heard Fosco's sharp intake of breath, but was relieved when he made no other sound or movement. The faeries formed their healing circle once more around the cutting, which now looked much improved, its petals fully open and glowing with renewed vitality. Lumina appeared from her blossom and flew to Marigold's shoulder. "The herbs and dew were well chosen," she said, her tiny voice carrying just far enough for Marigold to hear. "They have strengthened our magic. And now, if the bell is rung 3 times, precisely as the moon reaches that ancient oak branch," she pointed to where the moon's light was just touching a gnarled limb of an old tree, "it will complete our healing ritual." Marigold nodded and carefully picked up the silver bell. She watched the moonlight's slow progression across the garden, waiting for the exact moment Lumina had specified. When the light touched the oak branch, she rang the bell 3 times, the clear, pure tones resonating through the night air like liquid silver. As the 3rd chime faded, something extraordinary happened. The strand of light connecting the cutting to the parent plant pulsed with renewed brilliance, and from within the cutting's bloom, the injured faerie rose slowly into the air. Her glow, which had been so faint the night before, now burned with a steady radiance. Her wings, previously drooping and lifeless, now fluttered with gathering strength. "Sister," the faeries called in unison, their voices combining into a chord of indescribable beauty. "Return to us. Be whole once more." The healing faerie flew in a small, tentative circle, then a wider one, gaining confidence with each beat of her wings. Finally, she joined the circle of her sisters, adding her light to their collective brilliance. The garden was transformed by their combined glow, every leaf and flower edge defined in shimmering silver, every shadow softened by reflected luminescence. From his bench, Fosco watched with an expression of pure wonder, tears glistening in his eyes. This was magic beyond anything in his collection, beauty that could not be contained in a glass case or catalogued in a book. It was living, breathing enchantment that existed on its own terms, not for the edification or entertainment of hobbits or any other beings. When the fairy circle completed their healing dance, the once injured fairy broke away and, to everyone's surprise, flew directly toward Fosco. He froze, afraid to even breathe as she hovered before his face, her tiny features now clearly visible to him for the first time. She was beautiful in a way that defied description, her features delicate as dewdrops, yet luminous with an inner strength. Her eyes, like tiny stars, regarded him without fear or rancor. She placed her diminutive hands together and bowed slightly to him, a gesture of acknowledgement rather than subservience. "You sought to possess what cannot be possessed," she said, her voice like the faintest chime of crystal. "But in the end, you chose compassion over collection. For this, you have our gratitude." Fosco, normally so eloquent and self-assured, could find no words. A tear slipped down his cheek as he inclined his head in a humble bow. The fairy touched her tiny hand to his tear, and where they connected, a spark of silver light glowed briefly before she flew back to her sisters. Lumina approached Marigold, who had watched the exchange with astonishment. "The healing is complete," the fairy announced with evident relief. "Our sister is restored, and the bond between Cutting and parent strengthened. Now, with your permission, we shall complete the final stage of our renewal." "Of course," Marigold agreed, though she wasn't entirely sure what this final stage entailed. "Whatever you need. Stand back, both of you," Lumina instructed, "and observe." Marigold moved to join Fosco on his bench, and together they watched as the fairies formed an intricate aerial pattern around the moonflower plant, their flight paths weaving an elaborate three-dimensional design that seemed to shimmer with its own light. The previously injured fairy took position at the center of the pattern, directly above the point where the cutting connected to the parent plant. As the fairies' dance reached its crescendo, the thin strand of light connecting the cutting grew brighter and broader, expanding until it enveloped both cutting and parent in a cocoon of silver radiance. For a breathless moment, the light was so intense that Marigold and Fosco had to shield their eyes. When the brilliance subsided and they could look again, they gasped in unison. Where before there had been a parent plant and a separate cutting, now there stood a single, magnificent moonflower plant, larger and more vibrant than ever. The cutting had not merely reattached, it had fully integrated, becoming one with the parent in a transformation that defied the normal rules of plant growth. New buds had already formed along the expanded structure, promising even more blooms in the nights to come. "It's beautiful," Marigold breathed, her eyes wide with wonder. "Extraordinary," Fosco agreed, his voice hushed with reverence. "I have travelled far and collected much, but never have I witnessed such magic." The fairies, their task complete, returned to their respective blooms, each one pausing to bow to Marigold before disappearing into the heart of a flower. Only Lumina remained, hovering before the two hobbits. "Our gratitude extends to both of you," she said. "To you, Marigold, for your steadfast care and courage, and to you, Fosco Boffin, for learning that the truest appreciation of wonder comes not from possession, but from respect." "I have much to learn still," Fosco admitted, his usual bravado replaced by genuine humility. "But I should like to learn it if I may, not to collect or display, but to understand and protect." Lumina seemed to consider this for a moment, her tiny face solemn in thought. "Perhaps there is a way you might help us, if you are willing. Our kind exists in many places throughout Middle-earth, often vulnerable and misunderstood. A chronicler who records our stories without exploiting our existence could serve a valuable purpose." Fosco's eyes lit up with new purpose. "I would be honored beyond words. I could document without disturbing, learn without taking, share knowledge while protecting its sources, and I could help ensure he keeps that promise," Marigold added, with a gentle smile. "Perhaps together we could create a garden sanctuary, a place where magical plants and beings might find safety." "A noble ambition," Lumina approved. "In time, as trust is built, I might introduce you to others of our kind. But for now, we must rest. The healing has taken much of our strength." With those words, Lumina too retreated into her blossom, the petals closing gently around her diminutive form as the first hint of dawn appeared on the horizon. Fosco and Marigold sat in companionable silence for a time, watching as the moonflowers closed for the day, their silver glow fading as the sun's first rays touched the garden. "I suppose I should return home," Fosco said at last, rising from the bench. "But I wonder, might I return tomorrow evening? I should like to begin making proper notes with your supervision, of course." "I think that would be acceptable," Marigold agreed, "though I suspect the fairies will take some time to regain their full strength. We should not expect another display like tonight's for a while. Fosco nodded in understanding. Of course, their well-being must come first. He hesitated, then added, Marigold, I want you to know how truly sorry I am for my actions. I've spent a lifetime acquiring treasures without fully appreciating their value beyond the satisfaction of ownership. Last night has shown me there are wonders in this world that can or should not be possessed. It's a lesson worth learning, Marigold said kindly, and I'm glad it didn't come at too high a cost. As Fosco took his leave, promising to return the following evening, Marigold gazed at her transformed moonflower garden with a sense of contented wonder. The adventure had been frightening at times, but it had also brought unexpected friendship and a deeper connection to the magic that flowed through the quieter corners of Middle-earth. She gently touched one of the closed moonflower blossoms. Rest well, little ones, she whispered. Dream of starlight and silver wings. The seasons turned their gentle wheel over the Shire, summer giving way to autumn, autumn to winter, and winter at last yielding to the sweet promise of spring. Throughout these changes, Marigold's garden flourished in ways that amazed even the most experienced hobbit gardeners in Hobbiton. The moonflower plant, now twice its original size, had become the centerpiece of what locals had begun to call the Twilight Garden, a name that acknowledged its special beauty after sunset, without directly mentioning the faeries that only a select few were permitted to see. Fosco had proven true to his word, transforming from an acquisitive collector into a respectful chronicler. He had converted one of the rooms in his hobbit hole into a study dedicated solely to documenting magical flora and fauna of Middle-earth, with special attention to those beings who preferred their existence to remain largely unknown to the wider world. His detailed illustrations and carefully worded descriptions captured the wonder of what he observed, without revealing locations or specific information that might put vulnerable magical creatures at risk. Together, he and Marigold had expanded the garden to include other night-blooming plants that complemented the moonflowers. There were evening primroses whose yellow blooms unfurled precisely at twilight, releasing a sweet fragrance that fairies particularly enjoyed. Star moss that glowed with a faint blue phosphorescence after dark, and shadow ferns whose delicate fronds appeared black during daylight, but revealed intricate silver patterns when bathed in moonlight. Word of their special garden had spread beyond Hobbiton, carried by travelers and visitors who glimpsed its beauty at dusk. Most merely appreciated it as an unusually lovely garden, but occasionally someone would arrive who sensed there was more to the place than met the ordinary eye. One such visitor arrived on a particularly fine spring evening. Just as Marigold was preparing the garden for nightfall, she was hanging tiny lanterns filled with fireflies-willing guests who stayed for a time before being released when she heard the garden gate creak open. Turning, she saw an elderly hobbit woman leaning heavily on a twisted hawthorn walking stick, her silver hair arranged in an elaborate braid that wrapped around her head like a crown. "Good evening to you," the old woman called, her voice surprisingly strong despite her apparent age. "Might this be the garden of Marigold Brandybuck?" "It is indeed," Marigold replied, setting down her lantern and approaching the visitor. "I am Marigold. How may I help you?" The old woman's eyes twinkled with a knowledge that immediately put Marigold on alert. This was no ordinary hobbit come to admire her flowers. "My name is Camellia Took," the woman said. "I've travelled from the North Farthing to speak with you about your special plantings, particularly those that bloom by moonlight and harbour small winged friends." Marigold's breath caught in her throat. "I'm not sure what you mean," she said carefully, though her eyes darted involuntarily toward the moonflowers. Camelia's smile deepened. "Peace, child. I am a friend to those you protect. Indeed, I've tended similar gardens in my time, though none so fine as this." She lowered her voice. "The fair folk speak highly of you among themselves. Word travels on the night breeze from one community to another." Relief washed over Marigold. "Then you are very welcome here, Mistress Took. Please, come sit and take some refreshment. The evening's display will begin soon." She led Camellia to the comfortable bench where she and Fosco often sat to observe the garden. The old woman settled herself with a contented sigh, her keen eyes taking in every detail of her surroundings. "You've done remarkable work here," she said approvingly. "I particularly like your use of star moss along the pathways, clever to provide illumination that doesn't overwhelm the more subtle glows of your other specimens." "Thank you," Marigold replied, pleased by the knowledgeable compliment. "It took some experimentation to get the balance right. I've no doubt. It always does." Camellia tapped her walking stick thoughtfully against the ground. "But I haven't come merely to admire your handiwork, lovely though it is. I bring a warning, or perhaps more accurately, a caution." Marigold tensed. "What sort of warning?" "Your garden's fame grows, as does the moonflower at its heart. Most visitors come with innocent appreciation, but not all. There are those in this world who, like your friend Fosco once did, seek to possess the unusual and magical. But unlike him, they might not have the capacity for change when confronted with the consequences of their actions." "Has something happened?" Marigold asked, alarm quickening her pulse. Camellia shook her head. "Not yet, but whispers have reached certain ears collectors, scholars with more ambition than ethics, even a wizard or two with questionable intentions. The moonflower faeries are rare enough to attract unwanted attention." Marigold's hand flew to her mouth. "I never thought. We've been so careful about who we allow to see them." "I know, child. You've done well. But magic calls to those attuned to it, sometimes across great distances. You need better protections than mere discretion can provide." "What kind of protections?" Camellia reached into a small pouch at her belt and withdrew a handful of what appeared to be ordinary river stones, smooth and grey. But as she opened her palm fully, Marigold saw that each stone was marked with a delicate rune that caught the fading sunlight. "Boundary stones," Camellia explained. "An old magic, subtle but effective. Place these at the four corners of your garden, and one beside the moonflower itself. They create a gentle confusion in the minds of those with ill intent, not enough to harm, merely enough to turn their thoughts elsewhere, to make them forget what drew them here in the first place." "And they won't harm the fairies?" Marigold asked, accepting the stones carefully. "Not in the slightest. In fact, the fair folk recognize these as symbols of protection and respect. They'll know you're taking additional steps to safeguard them." Just then, the garden gate creaked open once more, and Fosco appeared, his arms laden with new notebooks and freshly sharpened pencils. He stopped short at the sight of the elderly visitor, caution immediately evident in his stance. "It's all right, Fosco," Marigold called. "This is Camellia Took, from the North Farthing. She's a friend to those we protect." Fosco relaxed visibly and approached with a respectful bow. "An honor, Mistress Took. Any friend of the fair folk is welcome here." "Ah, you must be the reformed collector," Camellia said with a knowing smile. "I've heard of your transformation as well. Your chronicles are spoken of with appreciation by those who value accurate but discreet documentation." Fosco beamed with pride at this validation. "I strive to record faithfully while protecting those who wish to remain hidden. It's a delicate balance." "The best work usually is," Camellia agreed. As the last light of day faded from the sky and the first stars appeared, Marigold explained Camelia's warning and the protection she had offered. Together, the three hobbits placed the boundary stones at the garden's corners, Marigold singing softly as each one was set. When the final stone was positioned beside the moonflower plant, a subtle ripple seemed to pass through the garden, like the gentlest breeze, though no leaf moved. "It is done," Camellia said with satisfaction. "The boundary is established. Those with pure appreciation in their hearts will still find this place, but those seeking to exploit will suddenly find their memories unclear, their directions muddled." No sooner had she spoken than the first moonflower blossom began to open, its silvery petals unfurling in the growing moonlight. One by one, the fairies emerged, their delicate forms glowing with inner radiance. They seemed especially vibrant tonight, perhaps responding to the added protection, or perhaps simply rejoicing in the perfect spring evening. Lumina, now recognizable to both Marigold and Fosco as the lead fairy, approached the three hobbits. Her tiny face registered surprise at the sight of Camellia, then broke into a radiant smile. "Camellia Stargazer," she said, using what appeared to be a name unknown to either Marigold or Fosco. "It has been many seasons since you tended the northern gardens. We had heard you passed beyond," the elderly hobbit chuckled. "Not quite yet, though the time approaches. I wish to make one final journey, to see how the southern communities fare, and to ensure protections are in place before I depart." "You honor us with your concern," Lumina said, executing a graceful aerial bow. "The boundary stones are felt and welcomed." What followed was an evening of rare magic and beauty. Perhaps, sensing the significance of Camelia's visit, the fairies put on a display more spectacular than any Marigold had witnessed before. They danced in complex patterns that seemed to weave the moonlight itself into tangible ribbons of silver. They sang in harmonies so perfect that tears flowed freely down the hobbits' cheeks. And as the night deepened, more fairies arrived, visitors from distant gardens, coming to pay respect to Camellia and to strengthen the bonds between their communities. "It's a fairy confluence," Camellia whispered, her aged face alight with joy. "Very rare, very special. They're reinforcing the protections we've set, adding their own magic to ours." By the time the moon began its descent toward the horizon, the garden hummed with power knot, the overwhelming force of wizardry or the ancient might of elven magic. But something gentler, yet no less potent. It was the quiet strength of growing things, of small beings in harmony with the natural world, of boundaries respected and diversity celebrated. As dawn approached, and the fairies began to retreat to their blossoms, Lumina hovered before the three hobbits one last time. "The garden is secured," she announced. "Word will spread through our networks that this is a sanctuary, protected by both hobbit and fairy magic. Camellia Stargazer, your final gift to our kind, will be remembered in our songs." "It has been my honor to serve as bridge between our worlds," the elderly hobbit replied, her voice thick with emotion. After the fairies had disappeared into their flowers, Camellia turned to Marigold and Fosco. "I must continue my journey, but I leave with a light heart, knowing the Moonflower Garden is in such capable hands." "Won't you stay longer?" Marigold asked. "There's so much I could learn from you." Camellia smiled gently. "The knowledge you need most will come from them," she said, nodding toward the moonflowers. "Listen with your heart as well as your ears, and the garden itself will teach you." And so, as the sun rose on a new day in the Shire, Marigold and Fosco bid farewell to Camellia Took, watching as the remarkable old hobbit made her way down the lane with surprising sprightliness for one of her apparent years. The Twilight Garden, now secure within its subtle boundaries, continued to thrive and grow, a place where the magic that flows quietly through Middle-earth found safe harbor and appreciative guardians. And if, on certain special nights when the moon was full and the air was sweet with the scent of blooming flowers, lucky passers-by might glimpse unusual lights dancing above Marigold's garden well, that was simply part of the charm of life in the Shire, where extraordinary things sometimes happened in the most ordinary of places. Story 3. In the gentle hills of the Shire, where the summer breeze carried the scent of wildflowers and fresh-baked bread, there lived a hobbit named Bramble Goodbarrel. Unlike many of his kin who were content with their gardens and pantries, Bramble had always felt a quiet curiosity about the world beyond the borders of Hobbiton. Not that he wished for great adventures or perilous quests, no indeed, for he was a hobbit through and through, but he did wonder about the tales travellers told when they passed through the Green Dragon Inn. Bramble's home was a cosy hobbit hole, nestled beneath an ancient oak tree, whose roots formed natural shelves along his walls. These shelves housed his most prized possessions, a collection of pressed flowers, interesting pebbles from the Brandywine River, and several maps gifted to him by a kindly ranger who had once stayed in Hobbiton during a particularly harsh winter. On this particular evening, as the golden light of sunset filtered through his round windows, Bramble sat in his favourite armchair, a steaming cup of chamomile tea at his elbow, studying one of these maps. His finger traced the winding path that led from Hobbiton to a place marked in faded ink as the Garden of Whispers. "I wonder," he murmured to himself, "if such a place truly exists, or if it's merely the fancy of some map-maker's imagination." The map showed the garden lying just beyond the East Woods, perhaps a day's leisurely walk from Hobbiton. According to the notes scribbled in the margin, it was said to be a place where the very plants could speak, sharing wisdom with those patient enough to listen. Bramble chuckled at the thought. Plants that could talk. What would his prize-winning tomatoes say if they could speak? Probably complaints about the rainy spring they'd had. A gentle knock at his door roused him from his musings. Opening it, he found his dear friend Marigold Proudfoot, her arms laden with a covered basket that released the most tantalizing aroma. "Evening, Bramble," she said cheerfully. "I've brought you some of my fresh blackberry tarts. Thought you might enjoy them with your evening tea." "Marigold, you're too kind," Bramble replied, ushering her inside. "I was just thinking about having a second cup. Would you care to join me?" As they settled in his cozy kitchen, the golden light deepening to amber, Bramble found himself telling Marigold about the Garden of Whispers. To his surprise, her eyes widened with recognition. My grandmother used to tell stories of that place, she said, leaning forward. She claimed her great-uncle once visited it and returned with a flower that never wilted. It sat on her mantelpiece for years, still as fresh as the day it was picked. Bramble's heart quickened with interest. Then it's real? Not just a fanciful marking on an old map. Marigold's eyes twinkled. Real enough that my grandmother believed in it, and she wasn't one for flights of fancy. She said the garden lies in a hidden valley where the morning mist never fully clears, and the flowers shimmer like they're dusted with starlight. As the evening wore on, and the stars appeared one by one in the velvet sky, outside Bramble's window, the two hobbits spoke of the mysterious garden. By the time Marigold departed, a plan had formed in Bramble's mind. He would seek out this garden of whispers and discover for himself whether the tales were true. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of day that seemed made for beginning small adventures. Bramble packed a modest rucksack with essentials, a change of clothes, some handkerchiefs, packets of seed cakes and dried apples, a water flask, and of course, the map. He left a note for his neighbour to tend his garden, and locked his round green door behind him. The path eastward was well trodden at first, winding past familiar hobbit holes and fields where his neighbours waved cheerful greetings. Soon, however, the cultivated lands gave way to wilder meadows dotted with daisies and buttercups. Bramble walked at a leisurely pace, enjoying the sunshine on his face and the soft grass beneath his feet. By midday, he had reached the edge of the East Woods, where he sat beside a bubbling stream to eat his lunch. The trees here grew tall and close together, their leaves creating a green canopy that dappled the forest floor with shifting patterns of light and shadow. After his meal, Bramble consulted his map once more before venturing into the cool shade of the woods. The forest was peaceful, filled with the gentle sounds of birdsong and rustling leaves. Occasionally, a rabbit or squirrel would dart across his path, pausing to regard him with curious eyes before disappearing into the undergrowth. Though the woods grew denser as he progressed, the path remained clear, as if welcoming him deeper into its mysteries. As afternoon waned toward evening, the trees began to thin, and Bramble could see a soft, pearly mist gathering in the distance. According to his map, the Garden of Whispers lay just beyond a circle of white stones that marked the boundary between the ordinary world and the place of magic. Bramble's heart beat a little faster as he approached the edge of the forest. There, just as the map had promised, stood a ring of stones, each one taller than a hobbit and gleaming softly in the fading light. Beyond them, the mist swirled and danced, obscuring whatever lay within. Taking a deep breath, Bramble stepped between two of the ancient stones and into the mist. The air immediately felt different, softer somehow, and filled with a sweet fragrance that reminded him of honeysuckle and lilac, though more intense than either. As he walked forward, the mist began to thin, revealing glimpses of what lay beyond. A garden unlike any he had ever seen. The garden unfurled before him like a dream made tangible. Paths of smooth white stones wound between flower beds that shimmered with colours more vivid than any Bramble had seen before. Roses bloomed in hues of midnight blue and silver, while lilies that seemed crafted of living gold nodded gently beside pools of water, so clear they mirrored the sky perfectly. Trees with bark of deep purple and leaves that sparkled like emeralds provided dappled shade, their branches arching gracefully to form natural bowers. But most remarkable of all was the sounds that filled the air. At first, Bramble thought it was merely the rustling of leaves in a gentle breeze, but as he stepped further into the garden, the noise resolved itself into something more deliberate. Whispers, countless whispers, rose from every plant and flower. Some were as faint as the brush of moth wings, while others had the clarity of a stream bubbling over stones. Together they created a symphony of soft voices that ebbed and flowed like the tide. "Hello?" Bramble called softly, feeling rather foolish speaking to flowers. "I mean no harm. I've come a long way to see this garden." The whispers seemed to pause for a moment, as if the entire garden had taken a collective breath. Then, to Bramble's astonishment, a cluster of tall foxgloves near his path bent their stems toward him, their bell-shaped blossoms trembling slightly, as a voice emerged. "A hobbit," the voice said, delicate but distinct. "We have not had a hobbit visitor in many years." Bramble blinked, his mouth falling open in surprise. Though he had hoped, even expected, to find talking plants, the reality of it was far more startling than he had imagined. "You truly can speak," he managed at last. A patch of daisies near his feet rippled with what might have been laughter. "Of course we speak," they replied in a chorus of tiny voices. "All plants do, but few have the patience to listen." As the initial shock wore off, Bramble's natural hobbit curiosity took over. "Do the plants in my garden speak too? My tomatoes and roses and apple tree?" "Indeed," replied a stately silver-leaved tree whose branches stretched protectively over a patch of violets. "Though their voices may be fainter than ours, for we have grown in magical soil and have been tended by those with knowledge of the old ways." Bramble thought of all the hours he had spent in his garden, never suspecting that his beloved plants might have been trying to communicate with him. "What do they say, my garden plants?" "They speak of the sun and rain," the silver tree explained. "They talk of the earth that nourishes them and the creatures that visit them. They sing of growth and the turning of seasons. And they speak of you, little hobbit, of your gentle hands and your kind heart." Something warm blossomed in Bramble's chest at these words. "I had no idea." "Few do," said the foxgloves. "But you have found your way here, which means you have an open heart and a willing ear. Now, come further in. Night approaches, and the garden has much to show you." Indeed, the sky above was deepening to indigo, and the first stars were appearing like silver pinpricks in the velvet darkness. As Bramble followed the winding path deeper into the garden, he noticed that many of the flowers were beginning to glow with soft inner light blues and purples, golds and silvers illuminating the way forward. The path led to a small clearing where a circular pool reflected the stars above. Around its edge grew 7 white flowers, each as large as Bramble's hand, their petals luminous in the gathering darkness. As he approached, these flowers turned toward him, their centers releasing a gentle fragrance that made him think of cool mountain streams and spring mornings. "These are the dream blossoms," the foxglove's voice explained from behind him. "They bloom only at twilight and fade with the dawn. Their nectar brings deep and restful sleep and dreams filled with wisdom." Bramble gazed at the beautiful flowers, entranced by their soft glow. May I sit here a while?" he asked. "The garden welcomes you," came the reply, this time from the dream blossoms themselves, their voices like silver bells. "Rest here tonight. Listen to our songs. Perhaps you will learn what you seek, though you may not yet know what that is." Grateful, Bramble settled himself on a soft patch of moss near the pool. From his pack, he took out the last of his seed cakes and ate them slowly, savoring each bite as he watched the garden transform in the night. More and more plants began to glow, creating a landscape of gentle light. The whispers grew more melodious, blending into songs without words that nonetheless conveyed feelings of peace and ancient knowledge. As the full darkness of night embraced the garden, the dream blossoms began to sway gently, though there was no wind. Droplets of golden nectar formed at their centers, shimmering like liquid starlight. The fragrance grew stronger, enveloping Bramble in its soothing embrace. His eyelids grew heavy, and he lay back on the moss, which seemed to shape itself to cradle him comfortably. Above, the stars wheeled slowly in their eternal dance, while around him the garden sang its nighttime lullaby. "Sleep now," the dream blossoms murmured. "Sleep and dream, little hobbit. The garden has waited for one like you, one who listens." As Bramble drifted into slumber, he felt as if he were sinking into the very earth, becoming one with the garden and all its growing things. The whispers followed him into his dreams, where they took shape as figures of light that danced among the stars, telling stories older than the Shire itself. And in these dreams, Bramble began to understand. In his dreams, Bramble walked through halls of living memory. The figures of light that danced around him showed him visions of the garden throughout the ages. He saw elves with starlight in their hair, tending the first seedlings in soil mixed with stardust. He witnessed dwarves crafting the white stone paths with reverent care, their strong hands gentle as they placed each stone. He glimpsed men and women of ancient lineage, gathering herbs in woven baskets, their voices raised in songs of gratitude. And he saw Hobbit's own ancestors, perhaps visiting the garden in times long past, listening to the whispers and carrying seeds back to what would one day become the Shire. The flowers of his homeland, he realized, were distant cousins to these magical blooms, their voices diminished, but not entirely lost across the generations. Through it all, the Dream Blossom's song wove a thread of understanding. The garden existed in a place between realms, a sanctuary preserved by magic older than the oldest kingdoms of Middle-earth. It had been created as a repository of knowledge, a living library where the wisdom of growing things could be shared with those who sought it. But why has it been forgotten? Bramble asked in his dream. Why do so few know of this place? The world grows faster, replied the lights as they danced. Fewer hearts pause to listen. The paths that lead here can only be found by those who value stillness and patience. And so, over time, we have faded from memory, becoming just a tale told to children, a curious marking on old maps. As the night deepened, Bramble's dreams shifted. Now he saw his own garden in Hobbiton, but with new eyes. Each plant glowed with a soft inner light, just like those in the Garden of Whispers, though fainter. He could hear their quiet voices now, murmuring about the rainfall, discussing the quality of the soil, commenting on his gardening techniques. He waters us well enough, his prized rosebush was saying, but he could stand to add more compost to the soil come spring. I appreciate how he sings while he works, added his apple tree. The vibrations help my fruit grow sweeter. If only he would listen, sighed his row of carrots. We could tell him when we're ready to be harvested. Sometimes he picks us too soon, sometimes too late. Bramble felt a pang of regret at having been deaf to these conversations for so long. How much wisdom had he missed by not understanding that his garden was alive in ways beyond what he had imagined? As dawn approached in the waking world, Bramble's dreams began to fade, the figures of light retreating like stars before the sun. The last vision he saw was of himself, returned to Hobbiton, kneeling in his garden with his eyes closed and his hands pressed to the earth, listening. He awoke to find the garden transformed by morning light. The glowing plants had dimmed, their luminescence unnecessary in the golden sunshine that filtered through the leaves. The dream blossoms had indeed vanished, leaving only circular indentations in the soft earth to show where they had been. But the whispers remained, more subdued now, but still present, like the gentle hum of bees among flowers. "Good morning, little hobbit," greeted the foxgloves, their stems bending gracefully toward him. "Did you dream well?" Bramble sat up, stretching his limbs. He felt remarkably refreshed, as if he had slept for days rather than a single night. "I dreamed of many things," he replied, "of the garden's history, and of my own garden at home. I never realized how much I'd been missing by not hearing what my plants were trying to tell me." "That is often the way of it," said a patch of thyme that grew beside the pool. Its voice was spicy and crisp, like its scent. "We speak always, but few remember how to hear. Yet you came seeking, which shows wisdom already growing in your heart." Bramble rose and walked to the edge of the pool, where he knelt to splash cool water on his face. His reflection gazed back at him, but somehow changed. His eyes seemed brighter, more perceptive. "I wish to learn," he said, looking up at the plants that surrounded him. "I wish to understand what my garden at home has been trying to tell me all these years." "Then you shall," promised a cluster of tall irises whose petals shimmered with iridescent hues. "Stay with us a while. Walk among us. Listen. By the time you return home, your ears will be opened to our language." And so, Bramble spent the day wandering through the Garden of Whispers, listening to the plants share their ancient wisdom. He learned how they communicated not just through sounds, but through sense and even through the earth itself, roots intertwining to share messages across vast distances. He discovered that each species had its own voice, its own perspective, its own unique wisdom to impart. The roses spoke of beauty and the courage to bloom even among thorns. The oak trees rumbled of patience and the slow, steady strength that comes from deep roots and gradual growth. The moss whispered of adaptability and finding nourishment even in the shadows. The climbing vines chattered of ambition and the joy of reaching ever upward toward the light as the sun began its westward journey. Bramble sat beneath the silver-leaved tree, sharing the last of his dried apples, as he absorbed all he had learned. A gentle breeze stirred the garden, carrying the mingled fragrances of 100 different blooms. "You have listened well," said the silver tree, its deep voice resonating in the wood of its trunk. "But there is one more thing you must see before darkness falls again. Follow the path of red stones as the sun begins to set. It will lead you to the heart of the garden." Bramble nodded, curious about this new mystery. "What will I find there?" The silver tree's leaves rustled softly. "That is for you to discover, little hobbit. Some secrets must be experienced, rather than told." As the afternoon waned, Bramble explored more of the garden, marveling at plants he had never seen before, flowers with petals that changed color as he watched, vines that seemed to dance to their own internal rhythm, and tiny star-shaped blossoms that floated just above the ground without any visible stems. When the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and amber, Bramble remembered the silver tree's instructions. He looked around until he spotted a path laid with stones of deep rust red, almost the color of autumn leaves. Taking a deep breath, he set off along this new route. The red stone path wound through areas of the garden he hadn't yet explored. Here, the plants grew taller, their forms more ancient and majestic. Massive trees with trunks wider than 3 hobbits could encircle, spread their branches like protective arms over ferns that whispered of ages long past. Flowers bloomed whose shapes seemed almost architectural, their complex structures housing tiny glowing creatures that might have been fireflies, or perhaps something more magical. As he walked, Bramble noticed that the whispers around him were changing, becoming deeper and more rhythmic, like a heartbeat translated into sound. The air grew warmer, filled with fragrances so rich and complex they made him feel slightly dizzy. The light, too, was different here, golden and thick, as if the sunset had been captured and distilled into the very atmosphere. The path led him finally to a circular clearing surrounded by 12 trees, unlike any Bramble had ever seen. Their bark was the color of burnished copper, and their leaves shimmered with all the colors of sunset-ridden gold, purple and orange. At the center of the clearing stood a single plant that made Bramble catch his breath in wonder. It was a flower, though to call it merely a flower seemed inadequate. It stood as tall as Bramble himself, its stem thick and strong, a deep emerald green that seemed to pulse with inner light. The bloom atop this remarkable stem was enormous, its petals arranged in an intricate spiral pattern that seemed to draw the eye inward. Each petal was a different color, not solid but shifting and swirling as if containing entire landscapes within its surface. "Welcome to the heart of the garden," said a voice unlike any Bramble had heard before. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, deep and resonant, yet also high and clear, like many voices speaking in perfect harmony. With a start, Bramble realized it was the great flower itself that addressed him. You are the heart?" he asked, his own voice sounding small and thin in comparison. "I am," the flower replied, its petals rippling gently. "I am the first bloom that was planted here, when this garden was nothing but empty soil. From me, all other plants here draw their strength and magic. Through me, they speak and share their wisdom." Bramble felt a sense of awe wash over him. He was in the presence of something ancient and powerful, yet also infinitely gentle. "It's an honor," he said, giving a small bow. "I never imagined such a being could exist." The heart's petals shifted in what might have been amusement. "There are many wonders in Middle-earth that remain hidden from casual eyes, little hobbit. But you have found your way here, which shows that you have a seeker's heart." "I came because I was curious about the Garden of Whispers," Bramble admitted. "I wanted to know if plants could really talk, but I've learned so much more than I expected." "And what have you learned?" asked the heart, its voice like warm honey in Bramble's mind. Bramble thought for a moment. "I've learned that the world is more alive than I realized, that everything grows and speaks in its own way. If only we have the patience to listen, that there's wisdom in the most ordinary garden, if we know how to hear it." "Yes," said the heart, and its approval felt like sunshine spreading through Bramble's chest. "That is a beginning. But there is one more lesson, perhaps the most important one." The great flower's petals began to glow more brightly, and the spiral at its center seemed to deepen, becoming a well of light that pulled at Bramble's gaze. "Come closer," the heart invited. "Look into my center and see what lies there." Hesitantly, Bramble stepped forward until he stood directly before the massive bloom. The spiral of petals seemed to move now, rotating slowly, drawing his gaze inexorably inward. As he looked into the heart of the heart, the light grew brighter, filling his vision until he could see nothing else. And then, within that light, images began to form. He saw his own garden in Hobbiton, but somehow connected to other thin threads of golden light, extending from his roses to those in neighboring gardens, from his apple tree to the orchard beyond the hill, from his patch of herbs to the wild thyme that grew along the Brandywine. These threads extended further, connecting to gardens in Bree, in Rivendell, in places he didn't recognize but knew existed far beyond the borders of the Shire. The vision expanded, and now he saw that these connections were not limited to plants of the same kind. Everything was linked: trees to flowers, flowers to grasses, grasses to moss, moss to trees again, in an endless web of communication and mutual support, and the web extended beyond plants, incorporating birds and bees, butterflies and squirrels, and yes, even hobbits and other thinking beings. Everything is connected, the heart's voice explained as Bramble witnessed this magnificent tapestry. No garden stands alone, no life exists in isolation. What affects one affects all, though the connection may be too subtle for most to perceive. The vision faded gradually, the light receding until Bramble once again stood before the great flower in the clearing, though its image seemed burned into his mind's eye. "Remember this, Bramble Goodbarrel," said the heart. "When you tend your garden, you tend a small part of the great web that sustains all life. Listen to your plants, yes, but also help them to connect with others. That is how wisdom spreads, how balance is maintained, how healing occurs." Bramble stood in silent wonder, the heart's words resonating deep within him. The concept of such vast interconnection between all growing things filled him with a sense of both smallness and significance. His little garden in Hobbiton was but a tiny node in an immense web, yet it was also an essential part of that same web. "I understand," he said finally, his voice soft with reverence. "Or at least, I'm beginning to understand." "That is enough," the heart replied, its petals glowing with approval. "Understanding is a seed that grows over time, not a fruit to be plucked in a single moment." As the sun sank lower toward the horizon, the copper-barked trees around the clearing began to shimmer, their leaves catching the last golden rays and transforming them into a warm, encompassing light that bathed the entire space in amber radiance. "It is nearly time for you to return to the place where the dream blossoms grow," said the heart. "Night approaches, and they will soon emerge once more." "Must I leave tomorrow?" Bramble asked, surprised to find himself reluctant at the thought. The garden had worked its magic on him, making the outside world seem distant and less vibrant by comparison. The heart's petals rippled gently. "All journeys have their proper duration, little hobbit. You have learned what you came to learn. Now, you must take that knowledge back to your own garden, where it can grow and spread in its turn." Bramble nodded, understanding the wisdom in these words. "Thank you for sharing your knowledge with me. I'll do my best to honor it." "We know you will," said the heart, and its voice was joined by those of the 12 copper trees, creating a harmonious chord that seemed to vibrate in Bramble's very bones. "Now, follow the red path back. The dream blossoms await." With a respectful bow to the magnificent flower, Bramble turned and began to retrace his steps along the path of rust-red stones. As he walked, the garden around him seemed different, somehow more vivid, more present. He could hear the whispers more clearly now, understanding nuances that had escaped him before. The plants were not merely speaking, they were singing a complex, ever-changing symphony of life and growth, decay and renewal. By the time he reached the clearing with the reflective pool, twilight had fallen. The first stars were appearing in the deepening blue of the sky, and, as before, many of the plants had begun to glow with their inner light. Around the pool's edge, the 7 dream blossoms were emerging once more, unfurling their luminous petals to the night. "Welcome back, Bramble Goodbarrel." They greeted him in their silvery voices. "You have met the heart." "I have," he confirmed, settling himself once more on the soft moss beside the pool. "It showed me how everything is connected, how all gardens are part of one greater whole." "And now you see with new eyes," said the dream blossoms. "Tonight sleep once more beneath our watch. Dream of home and of the journey that awaits you. When you wake, you will be ready to return." As before, the dream blossom's sweet fragrance enveloped Bramble, bringing with it a profound sense of peace. He lay back on the moss, gazing up at the stars that now filled the night sky. The whispers of the garden became a lullaby, gentle and soothing, carrying him towards sleep. This night, his dreams were of Hobbiton not as he had left it, but as it might be. He saw himself walking through his garden, listening to his plants, and responding to their needs with newfound understanding. He saw neighbors pausing at his gate, curious about the changes in his garden, the unusual vibrancy of his flowers, the exceptional sweetness of his fruits. He saw himself sharing what he had learned, teaching others to listen, to connect, to understand the whispers that had always been there. The dream expanded to show the ripple effects of these small changes. Gardens throughout Hobbiton becoming more harmonious, more connected. The web of golden threads growing stronger, extending further. Wisdom spreading from plant to plant, from garden to garden, from hobbit to hobbit. When Bramble awoke the next morning, he felt renewed and purposeful. The dream had shown him not just what he had gained from his journey, but what he might share with others. He sat up, stretching his limbs and looking around at the garden that had taught him so much in such a short time. The foxgloves bent toward him once more. "You are ready to depart, we think." "Yes," Bramble agreed, "though I'll miss this place, and all of you." "The garden is always here for those who know how to find it," said a patch of wild mint, its voice fresh and invigorating. "And now you carry a part of it within you, wherever you go." Bramble gathered his few belongings and prepared for the journey home. As he did so, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. Small bed of seedlings near the pool, their tiny leaves just beginning to unfurl. "What are these?" he asked, kneeling to look more closely. "Children of the dream blossoms," replied the foxgloves. "They rarely set seed, but when they do, it is meant as a gift. Take one with you. Plant it in your garden at home. It will thrive there, with your care, and perhaps in time it will help others learn to listen as you have." With great care, Bramble dug up one of the tiny seedlings, wrapping its roots in a damp cloth before placing it in his pack. The responsibility felt significant. The would be bringing a piece of this magical place back to the ordinary world. "Thank you," he said, looking around at the garden that had changed him in ways he was only beginning to understand. "For everything." The garden seemed reluctant to let Bramble leave, or perhaps it was Bramble who was reluctant to go. The paths twisted in unfamiliar ways, leading him back to places he had already visited, rather than toward the stone circle that marked the boundary. Yet he knew this was no malice on the garden's part, merely a reflection of his own desire to linger a little longer in this place of wonder. "You must focus your thoughts on home," advised a clump of bluebells, their delicate voices chiming like tiny bells. "The garden responds to the heart's desires. If you truly wish to return, the path will show itself." Taking this wisdom to heart, Bramble closed his eyes for a moment and pictured his cozy hobbit hole beneath the oak tree, his own modest garden with its neat rows of vegetables and cheerful flower borders. He thought of Marigold Proudfoot, and how eager he was to share with her what he had learned. When he opened his eyes again, the path before him had straightened, leading directly toward a gap in the ever-present mist that surrounded the garden's edges. "There," said the bluebells with satisfaction. "The way home reveals itself." Bramble walked the path with purposeful steps, pausing only once to look back at the magical landscape that had taught him so much. "Farewell," he called softly, knowing that all the plants could hear him. "Thank you for your wisdom. I will carry it with me always." A chorus of whispers rose in response, the garden's collective voice bidding him safe journey and good growing. The sound followed him like a gentle breeze as he approached the ring of white stones that marked the boundary. As Bramble stepped between two of the tall stones and into the mist beyond, he felt a moment of disorientation, as if the world had shifted slightly around him. The mist swirled thick and pearly, obscuring his vision completely. For a few heartbeats, he could see nothing, hear nothing but his own breathing and the soft rustle of his pack where the dream blossom seedling nestled. Then the mist began to thin, revealing the familiar trees of the east woods. The sun was just rising, painting the sky with strokes of pink and gold. Birds sang their morning songs, and somewhere nearby, a stream gurgled over stones. It was as if he had stepped directly from evening into dawn, time itself bending around the garden's boundaries. He turned to look back at where he had come from, half expecting to see the stone circle and the magical garden beyond. But there was only more forest, trees stretching as far as his eye could see. For a moment, a flutter of doubt passed through him. Had it all been just a dream? Had he simply fallen asleep in the woods and imagined the Garden of Whispers with all its magical plants and ancient wisdom? But then he felt a gentle stirring in his pack, as if something inside were reaching for the sunlight. The dream blossom seedling very real, very alive, and now his responsibility to nurture. With a smile, Bramble adjusted his pack and set off toward home, his step light, despite the long journey ahead. The walk back through the east woods seemed shorter than his outward journey had been. Perhaps it was because his mind was so full of all he had learned, or perhaps It was another piece of the garden's magic, still clinging to him. The trees around him, which had seemed merely pleasant before, now whispered their own quiet tales as he passed. He caught fragments of their discussions of the previous winter's snow, gentle complaints about woodpeckers, debates over which direction the wind would blow that day. By midday, Bramble had reached the edge of the woods and could see the familiar rolling hills of the Shire stretching before him. Fields of golden wheat swayed in the gentle breeze, and in the distance, the round doors and windows of hobbit homes dotted the hillsides like colourful jewels. He stopped to eat a light lunch beside a small pond, where a family of ducks paddled contentedly among water lilies. As he munched on an apple highs, last piece of food from home, he listened to the lilies discussing the water quality and the recent hatching of dragonfly eggs among their roots. "Excuse me," he said politely, addressing the nearest lily pad. "I don't mean to interrupt, but I was wondering if you might share a bit of your water. I have a special seedling with me that needs moisture." The lily pad quivered in surprise, its small white flower turning toward him. "A hobbit who hears us. How extraordinary. Of course you may take some water, friend. It's particularly good today. The rain 2 nights ago refreshed the pond beautifully." Bramble thanked the lily and carefully dampened the cloth around the dream blossom seedling. Its tiny leaves seemed to perk up at the touch of water, and Bramble felt a wave of protectiveness toward the small plant. It was more than just a souvenir of his journey. It was a trust, a living connection to the magic he had experienced. As afternoon wore on, Bramble walked through the familiar countryside of the Shire with new awareness. The hedgerows that lined the paths were alive with whispered conversations about passing travellers and weather predictions. The ancient oak that marked the crossroads rumbled deep thoughts about the generations of hobbits it had seen come and go. Even the grass beneath his feet had its tales to tell of worms and beetles, of rain and sun, of the endless cycle of growth and rest. Hobbits he passed on the road greeted him cheerfully, unaware of the changed hobbit who walked among them. To their eyes, he was simply Bramble Goodbarrel, returning from one of his walks perhaps a bit dustier than usual, perhaps with a brightness in his eyes that hadn't been there before, but still the same gentle hobbit they had always known. Little did they suspect that he carried with him a seed that might, in time, change the Shire in subtle but profound ways. As the sun began its descent toward the western hills, Bramble crested the final rise and saw his own little hobbit hole nestled beneath the ancient oak tree. The familiar round door, painted a cheerful green, the well-tended garden beds, the smoke curling lazily from the chimney all, filled him with a profound sense of homecoming. Yet he knew that while the place remained the same, he himself had changed. His neighbour, old Hamfast Mugwort, was out in his front garden, pruning his prize rose bushes. He looked up at Bramble's approach, raising a weathered hand in greeting. "There you are, Master Bramble. Beginning to wonder if you'd gotten yourself lost in the woods. Been gone 2 days. You have." Bramble blinked in surprise. 2 days? It had felt much longer in the Garden of Whispers, as if time flowed differently there. "Just a bit of exploring, Ham," he replied with a smile. "Found some interesting plants along the way." Hamfast nodded sagely, returning to his roses. "Well, good to have you back. Oh, and that Proudfoot lass has been by twice looking for you. Seemed quite eager to hear about your travels." Thanking his neighbour, Bramble continued down the path to his own gate. As he approached, he paused, looking at his garden with new eyes. The neat rows of vegetables, the colourful flower borders, the apple tree spreading its branches protectively over all they appeared outwardly the same. And yet now he could sense something more. A subtle murmur, like the distant sound of a stream, rose from the plants. Not as clear as the voices in the Garden of Whispers, but unmistakably there. "I'm home," he said softly to the garden, "and I can hear you now." A ripple seemed to pass through the plants, as if a gentle breeze had touched them, though the air was still. It felt like a greeting, a welcome home. Inside his hobbit hole, everything was just as he had left Ethith's favourite armchair waiting by the hearth, his books neatly arranged on their shelves, his tea canister ready on the kitchen counter. Yet these familiar surroundings now seemed to hold new possibilities, as if the world had expanded while appearing to remain the same. Bramble's first priority was to find a suitable home for the precious dream blossom seedling. He selected a special pot, one that his father had made many years ago from clay dug from the banks of the Brandywine River, and fired in the kiln of a dwarf craftsman who had been passing through the Shire. Into this pot, he placed the richest soil from his garden, mixed with a little sand for drainage and a sprinkle of the ashes from his hearth for nutrients. With infinite care, he transplanted the seedling, its tiny roots already seeking the new soil, its small leaves reaching for the last light of day through his window. As he worked, he spoke to it softly, reassuring it, telling it about its new home, and promising to care for it as it grew. "There," he said finally, setting the pot on his windowsill where it would catch the morning sun. "Rest now, little one. Tomorrow we'll introduce you to the rest of the garden." That evening, as Bramble sat in his armchair sipping a cup of chamomile tea, a knock came at his door. He opened it to find Marigold Proudfoot, her cheeks flushed with excitement and her eyes bright with curiosity. "Bramble Goodbarrel," she exclaimed, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "You actually went to the Garden of Whispers, didn't you? I can see it in your face." Bramble laughed, delighted by her perception. "I did indeed, Mary, and it was more wonderful than any tale could have described." They sat together by his hearth, and Bramble told her everything: the magical plants that spoke with clear voices, the dream blossoms that had guided his dreams, the heart of the garden that had shown him the interconnection of all growing things, and his new ability to hear the whispers of ordinary plants. Marigold listened with rapt attention, her eyes growing wider with each revelation. When he had finished, she sat in silence for a moment, absorbing it all. "And you really can hear what plants are saying now?" she asked finally. "Even these?" She gestured to a small vase of daisies that sat on Bramble's side table. "Yes," he nodded, "though their voices are quieter than those in the magical garden. It's more like feeling their thoughts than hearing actual words. Here, let me show you." Bramble closed his eyes and focused on the daisies. After a moment, he smiled. "They're talking about how the water in their vase needs changing. They can sense it's beginning to stagnate, and they're a bit confused about being indoors, away from the sun and the bees." Marigold's expression was a mixture of wonder and skepticism. "I believe you, Bramble. I truly do. But I wish I could hear them too. Perhaps someday you will," he said gently. "The heart told me that this knowledge is meant to be shared. And look." He showed her the dream blossom seedling on the windowsill, its leaves now glowing faintly in the gathering dusk. "I brought back a piece of the garden's magic. Who knows what might happen as it grows." That night, Bramble slept in his own comfortable bed for the first time since his adventure began. His dreams were peaceful, filled with echoes of the garden's wisdom and visions of what might be. He saw his own garden flourishing as never before, the plants growing in harmony with each other and with him. He saw himself sharing his knowledge with Marigold and other interested hobbits, and he saw the dream blossom growing, its magic subtly influencing everything around it. He awoke at dawn, refreshed and eager to begin the work of applying what he had learned. His first act was to check on the seedling, which had grown noticeably overnight. Its stem was stronger, its leaves larger and more vibrantly green. The soft glow it emitted more pronounced even in the morning light. "Good morning, little one," he said, gently touching one of its leaves. "Shall we go out and meet the garden today?" After a hearty breakfast of porridge with honey and blackberries, Bramble carried the dream blossom seedling outside. The morning was perfect warm sunshine, a gentle breeze, and the sweet scent of his flowering apple tree filling the air. His garden seemed to quiver with anticipation as he stepped onto the path. "Good morning to you all," he said, addressing the assembled plants. "I've brought someone special to meet you." He knelt in the center of the garden, holding the potted seedling where all could sense its presence. A murmur ran through the garden, a rustling of leaves and gentle swaying of stems that had nothing to do with the breeze. "This is a dream blossom," Bramble explained. "It comes from a magical garden far away, where plants speak with clear voices and ancient wisdom is preserved. It's going to live here with us now, and perhaps help us understand each other better." Bramble had already decided where to plant the seedling in a special spot near the center of his garden, where it would receive just the right amount of sun and shade, and where its influence might spread evenly to all the other plants. He had prepared the soil the previous evening, enriching it with the best compost from his bin, and a little of the special fertilizer he reserved for his prize-winning tomatoes. With careful hands, he removed the seedling from its temporary pot and placed it in the prepared hole. As its roots touched the soil of the Shire for the first time, Bramble felt a subtle shift, as if something in the very fabric of his garden had changed. The dream blossom's leaves quivered, and for a moment its faint glow intensified, visible even in the bright morning light. "Welcome to your new home," Bramble said softly, patting the soil around the seedling's base. "May you grow strong and happy here." Over the next few days, Bramble spent most of his waking hours in the garden, listening to his plants with his newfound sensitivity and tending to their needs with greater understanding than ever before. He learned that his tomatoes preferred to be watered in the early morning rather than the evening. His roses asked for a different mulch, one with more oak leaves mixed in. His herbs revealed that they would produce more flavorful leaves if harvested just after the dew had dried, but before the full heat of the day. The dream blossom grew with remarkable speed, its stem thickening and its leaves multiplying. By the end of the first week, it stood as tall as Bramble's knee, and its glow at night had become noticeable enough that several passing hobbits had paused at his gate, wondering what strange plant produced such a gentle light. More remarkable still was the effect it had on the surrounding garden. All of Bramble's plants seemed to flourish as never before. Even the grass around his hobbit hole seemed greener and more resilient, bouncing back quickly when stepped upon. Marigold visited daily, fascinated by the changes. Though she still couldn't hear the plant's whispers as Bramble could, she had developed a sort of intuition, a feeling for what they might be saying. She would sit beside the dream blossom for hours, her eyes closed, simply listening with her heart rather than her ears. "I think I felt something today," she told Bramble one evening as they shared a pot of tea in his garden. The dream blossom glowed softly nearby, its light casting gentle shadows across the grass. "Not words exactly, but intentions. Your rosemary was very insistent about something." Bramble smiled. "It's been trying to tell you that it's ready for harvesting. It has more new growth than it can support comfortably and would appreciate a good pruning." Marigold's eyes widened. "That's it, exactly. I had the strangest urge to reach out and snip some branches, but I wasn't sure if I should." "Tomorrow, bring your garden shears," Bramble suggested. "The rosemary will be grateful, and you'll have fresh herbs for your cooking." Word of Bramble's extraordinary garden began to spread through Hobbiton. Neighbours would find excuses to pass by, slowing their steps to peer over his gate. Some of the bolder ones knocked on his door with questions about his gardening techniques or requests for cuttings from his thriving plants. Bramble shared freely both his plants and his knowledge. While he didn't tell everyone about the Garden of Whispers, or his ability to hear plants speaking, he did encourage them to spend quiet time in their gardens, to observe more carefully, to develop a feel for what their plants might need. "Plants have their own wisdom," he would say. "Our job is to learn how to listen to it." To his delight, some began to understand. Old Hamfast reported that since he'd started talking to his roses as Bramble suggested, they seemed to bloom more abundantly. The Took twins found that their vegetable patch yielded better harvests when they approached gardening with respectful attention, rather than just as a chore to be completed. Small changes perhaps, but Bramble recognized them as the beginning of something important to shift in how hobbits related to the growing things that sustained them. By the time midsummer arrived, the dream blossom had grown to Bramble's height and had produced its first bloomer magnificent flower that unfurled its petals at sunset, revealing a center that spiraled inward like the one Bramble had seen at the heart of the garden. Though smaller than its parent, it glowed with the same shifting colors, and its fragrance filled Bramble's garden with sweetness that drew visitors from throughout Hobbiton. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," whispered Marigold, standing beside Bramble as they watched the flower fully open for the first time. "And look, it's not just us watching." Indeed, drawn by some subtle magic, butterflies and bees had gathered despite the late hour, hovering around the bloom in a delicate aerial dance. Fireflies pulsed in rhythm with the flower's glow. Even the stars above seemed to shine more brightly, as if in recognition of the earthbound light that answered their celestial one. That night, as Bramble and Marigold sat beside the blooming dream blossom, something extraordinary happened. The flower's glow intensified, pulsing with a gentle rhythm that reminded Bramble of a heartbeat. Its fragrance deepened, becoming almost hypnotic in its sweetness. And then, soft but unmistakable, came a voice that both hobbits could hear. "Good evening, friends," said the dream blossom, its petals rippling slightly. "It is time for me to fulfill my purpose." Marigold gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "I heard it," she whispered. "Bramble, I truly heard it speak." Bramble nodded, equally amazed, despite his experiences in the Garden of Whispers. For the dream blossom to speak audibly here in the ordinary soil of the Shire, was beyond anything he had expected. "What purpose is that?" he asked the flower gently. "To bridge the silence," the dream blossom replied. "To help those who have forgotten how to listen, remember the old communion between growing things and those who tend them." As the flower spoke, its glow extended outward, tendrils of soft light spreading through the garden like gentle fingers. Where this light touched other plants, they too began to glow faintly, creating a luminous network throughout Bramble's garden. "Tonight, as I bloom for the first time, my voice can reach beyond these boundaries," the dream blossom continued. "But I need your help to share what I can teach." And so, guided by the magical bloom, Bramble and Marigold spent that midsummer night in the garden. The dream blossom taught them songs in a language older than the Shire itself, songs of growth and renewal, of sun and rain, of the deep wisdom of root and stem. As they learned these ancient melodies, Bramble and Marigold found that singing them enhanced their ability to hear the whispers of ordinary plants. By dawn, Marigold could hear the garden's voices almost as clearly as Bramble could. Her face shone with wonder as she listened to the morning greetings of daisies and the hungry murmurings of the climbing beans. "It's like discovering a whole new world that was here all along," she said, her eyes bright despite the night without sleep. "I never imagined." The dream blossom's first bloom lasted for 3 days and nights, its glow gradually dimming until, on the morning of the 4th day, the magnificent petals folded inward and fell gently to the earth. But its influence remained. The seeds of understanding had been planted, not just in Marigold but in others who had been drawn to witness the remarkable bloom. Throughout that summer, Bramble and Marigold became teachers of a sort, sharing what they had learned with any hobbit willing to listen. They taught the songs of the dream blossom, showed others how to sit quietly in their gardens, and open their hearts to the whispers around them, and explained how the needs of plants could be better met through listening rather than imposing. Not all hobbits were receptive, of course. Some scoffed at the idea of talking to plants, dismissing it as eccentric fancy. Others tried but grew frustrated when they couldn't immediately hear responses. Yet enough embraced the practice that small changes began to ripple through Hobbiton. Gardens flourished with unprecedented vitality. Harvests grew more abundant, the very air seemed fresher, more alive with the exhalations of thriving plants. And those hobbits who had learned to listen found themselves changed in subtle ways, more patient, more attuned to the natural world around them, more aware of the interconnections between all living things. By the time autumn approached, bringing with it cooler nights and the first hints of colour in the leaves, the dream blossom had produced 3 more blooms, each one drawing a larger crowd of curious hobbits. After each blooming, more people found they could hear at least something of what their plants were saying. The effect extended beyond gardens. Farmers who adopted these practices found their fields yielding better crops with less effort. The orchards of the Shire produced sweeter, juicier fruits. Even the woods at the borders seemed more welcoming, their ancient trees responding to the newfound awareness of the hobbits who walked beneath their branches. One crisp September morning, as Bramble was gently pruning his herb bed and listening to their appreciative whispers, he received an unexpected visitor. A tall figure in grey robes appeared at his garden gate, leaning on a gnarled staff and regarding the scene before him with keen interest. "Good morning, Bramble Goodbarrel," said Gandalf the Grey, for indeed it was the wizard himself who stood there. "I've been hearing some remarkable tales about your garden." Bramble straightened up, brushing soil from his hands. "Gandalf, what an unexpected pleasure. Please, come in and see for yourself." The wizard entered, his sharp eyes immediately drawn to the dream blossom, which stood tall and proud in the centre of the garden, though not currently in bloom. "Ah," he said softly, approaching the plant with reverence. "A child of the Garden of Whispers. I wondered when one might find its way to the Shire." Bramble's eyes widened in surprise. "You know of the garden? Have you been there?" Gandalf's eyes twinkled with mysterious knowledge. "I have walked many paths in Middle-earth, my dear hobbit, some of which are hidden from ordinary sight. The Garden of Whispers is one of the oldest and most magical places in all the land, a remnant of the world's first flowering." He knelt beside the dream blossom, not touching it, but studying it with clear appreciation. "You have cared for it well, and I see it has already begun its work here." "Its work?" Bramble asked, settling himself on the garden bench beside the wizard. You speak as if you knew this would happen. Gandalf's smile deepened, crinkling the corners of his eyes. The world unfolds as it must, my friend. When the time is right, wisdom finds its way to those ready to receive it. You were ready, and so the garden revealed itself to you. The wizard produced his pipe, and after a questioning glance at Bramble, who nodded permission, lit it with a subtle gesture. Sweet-smelling smoke curled upward, forming shapes that seemed almost like tiny dancing flowers before dissolving into the morning air. The Garden of Whispers has existed since the earliest days of Middle-earth, Gandalf explained, planted by the Valar themselves. As a place where the wisdom of growing things might be preserved, it reveals itself only rarely, and only to those with hearts open to its teachings. Bramble thought about this, recalling how he had found the garden almost by chance, following nothing more than curiosity and an old map. Or had it truly been chance? Perhaps something deeper had been at work, guiding his steps toward the knowledge he was meant to find. And the dream blossom? He asked. What will become of it? Already it has changed so much in Hobbiton. The dream blossom is a keeper of memories and a teacher of forgotten tongues, Gandalf said. It will continue to grow and bloom, sharing its wisdom with those willing to listen. In time, it will set seeds of its own, which may find their way to other gardens, other towns. Not all will thrive. The world has grown less receptive to such magic as the ages pass, but some will, and where they grow, understanding will deepen. The wizard drew thoughtfully on his pipe. You have begun something important here, Bramble Goodbarrel. Something that may seem small in the grand affairs of Middle-earth, yet holds its own quiet significance. For too long, the speaking peoples have forgotten how to listen to the whispers of the world around them. You are helping them remember. Over the next year, Gandalf's predictions proved true. The dream blossom continued to grow, eventually reaching twice Bramble's height. It bloomed regularly, each magnificent flower drawing more visitors, teaching more hobbits to hear the whispers that had always surrounded them. When it finally set seed, in the warm days of its second summer, Bramble and Marigold carefully collected the precious pods. Following the guidance of the parent plant, they distributed them to hobbits who had shown particular aptitude for listening: a gardener in Bywater, a farmer near the Brandywine, an herbalist in Michel Delving, and others throughout the Shire. Most of these seeds took root and grew, establishing new centres from which the ancient knowledge could spread. The web of understanding that Bramble had seen in his vision at the heart of the garden began to manifest in reality, connecting garden to garden, hobbit to hobbit, creating a subtle harmony that enhanced the already comfortable life of the Shire. Bramble himself became something of a local legend, the Hobbit, who could speak with plants. Children would visit his garden, wide-eyed with wonder, as he translated the whispers of daisies or the rumbling thoughts of ancient oak trees. Older hobbits sought his advice on their troubled gardens or difficult farming decisions. Even the most skeptical had to admit that following Bramble's guidance seemed to yield remarkable results. Marigold remained his closest friend and most dedicated student. Together they documented the songs taught by the Dream Blossom, the wisdom shared by ordinary plants, and the techniques that helped others learn to listen. Their collaboration eventually produced a small hand-bound book titled The Whispers of the Garden, which found its way into hobbit homes throughout the Shire. In time, something subtle but profound changed in the relationship between hobbits and the growing world around them. Gardens were no longer seen merely as sources of food or decoration, but as communities of living beings with their own wisdom to share. Farming became less an imposition of will upon the land, and more a conversation with it. Even the wild places, the woods and meadows at the Shire's borders, were approached with greater respect and awareness. As for the Garden of Whispers itself, it remained a place of legend, though Bramble sometimes wondered if other hobbits might find their way there in years to come. He never attempted to return himself. The garden had given him its gift, and his task now was to nurture that gift here, in his own corner of the world. On the 5th anniversary of his journey, Bramble sat in his garden at twilight, watching the stars appear one by one above the Dream Blossom's luminous form. The plant, now fully mature, glowed with a gentle radiance that illuminated the surrounding garden in soft, shifting colours. "Are you happy here?" he asked it, running his fingers lightly along one of its leaves. "Do you ever miss the Garden of Whispers?" The Dream Blossom's response came not in words, but in a wave of feeling contentment, purpose fulfilled, joy in growth and connection. Bramble understood. Just as he had carried a piece of the magical garden back to the Shire, The dream blossom had brought its home with it, transforming the ordinary soil where it grew into something extraordinary. As night deepened around him, Bramble felt a profound sense of peace. The journey that had begun with a curious map marking and a desire for adventure had led to something far more meaningful than he could have imagined. He had learned to listen, truly listen, to the world around him, and in doing so, had helped others remember this ancient communion. In the gentle darkness, the whispers of his garden surrounded him like an embrace, singing him softly toward dreams filled with growing things, and the endless, renewing cycle of life that connected all of Middle-earth in its vast, intricate web of being.